First.
First. Nobody else beat you. You win. I'm first.
Do you remember when that used to be like such a big thing, dude? First, and it was like on every
Yes.
fucking.
God damn it.
So good.
So good. What's up, my boys and the listeners? My boys. Just wait for people to roll on in this bitch.
Is old parents rolling up tonight?
Yeah, he should be here. Motherfucker better be here.
That motherfucker.
We studied linguistics together today, so hopefully he's right there. We're gonna be studying linguistics for a while, gentlemen. Hate to tell you that. It's a bit more complex than certain fields of philosophy. Super complex. Oh, Perry. Can't stay long and my mic is dead. Tart, I love you just for coming here for a little bit. It's okay. You don't feel obligated. Thank you. What Scott?
What branch of linguistics would it be that like how like certain languages have terms for ideas and notions that other languages don't have?
Oh, that's polysemitics.
Polysemitics.
Polysemitics, I think. So like a polyseme and a monoseme. Like if something is polysemic, it means multiple things in multiple different ways, probably in multiple languages. If it's monosemic, it has one way it means something. It's a word or a phrase or an utterance that means one and only one thing. That's a
I'm
monosemic.
sort of thinking of the notion, like like some languages they have words to describe ideas that other
like Chinese, like the Chinese,
like
the
Native
depth,
Americans,
the depth and breadth of all those like logographs and what they called them graphemes. All the different ways that the writing of Chinese can convey emotions in like one what is it called, symbol, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just one symbol can convey 10 thoughts.
an entire thing, right?
Yeah, it's really complex language with we're going to get into phonology and phonemes and all that stuff, which is the sound. We're going to get into morphemes and morphology, which is the way that the words change within a structure of language. We're going to get into graphemes and logographs, which is all writing, like writing shit like cuneiform and stuff. So many different styles of linguistics. So tonight we're just going to stay easy, though. We're just going to do a little history of linguistics, and then we'll open it up to the floor. But we're just go through the history real quick. There's a lot on Indian linguistics that I can't pronounce half of those. I can't. In my notes, I just have like. Just have like an abbreviation of it. I can't pronounce it, so
the Indian language is Jesus Christ.
It's ridiculous.
It's what is the main language? Because I know there's like a huge uproar in India right now because they're trying to set an official language.
Is that so?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Let me text Perry real quick. You coming, dog? He probably will.
Dude, in India they've got Hindi, Bengali, Maghani, Bhojpuri, Marathi, Matiti, Telugu, Tamil, Urdu. That's just like the start of the list. Holy moly.
Ridiculous. I like my flag being able to be seen. Let me mess with this here.
Dude, what I find interesting about that, though, is like, in that kind of situation, it's like people, like the notion of like Spanglish, right? So like, like you don't just have these languages, but you have all these like derivations of these languages depending on where you go and who you talk to. And
Mm-hmm. That is correct, sir. You win the prize. Come on, Perry. God dang it. I mean, Scott, you're as good. I mean, it's not like, it's not like, it's not like, oh, Scott's the dumbass. I need to wait for Perry to get here. Brett should be joining us, and so should be, well, Nivik, I guess, just left. Nope, there he is.
Niv.
Here comes Nivik Claus. Here comes Nivik Claus. Right down Nivik
Dude,
Claus Lane.
Perry, like, he could be, like, saving someone's life right now, though. We don't know what that guy. He's, like, fucking performing CPR.
Wasn't he the one who told us that he stopped on the way home one time and had to give somebody Narcan up the nose?
Yep.
Wasn't that him?
Yep.
Ah. What a fucking night. What a fucking night, bro. Ridiculous.
In that English is like a mutt language taken in by other languages.
All languages are, Niv.
Tapestry.
I think over time, it's kind of like English will eat all other languages, and it'll just be one language.
Oh, you think it'll be some kind of like changed form of English?
It most rapidly evolves. It's always like a new word every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's true. There is that's true. Yeah.
They're just busy speaking their language, but so it doesn't evolve. So what I'm thinking is that English would eventually eat it.
I mean, words fall out of play all the time in English. Scott, you know the word ninny hammer?
Ninny hammer? I do not know ninny hammer.
Let me make sure I'm correct about that one because I don't want to sound like an idiot, but that word already made me sound stupid. Ninny hammer.
I do know
a fool or a simpleton is a ninny hammer.
Okay. So that would just be shortened to like a ninny. That guy's a total ninny. Like that was like prominent.
Nobody uses that word anymore. Yeah.
It didn't fall out. It evolved. It's ninny.
Ninny, yeah. I guess it is ninny in some areas of the United States. I haven't really heard that.
Yeah, nobody really uses that anymore, though, Nivik.
No. Trying to think of like a 50s insult linguistically that's used. Like I know chew glass was a good insult back then.
Mm-hmm. Dude, well, here's one from the 80s that's not around anymore. Up your nose with a rubber hose, right? Do you remember that shit?
I haven't heard that. What about tubular?
Totally tubular.
Totally tubular, bro.
Dude, that's rad.
Radical. My God. Apparently he has just passed out. Okay. Fuck it. Let's talk about the history of linguistics. My children of the torture time. So obviously we covered semiotics last time. Do you remember that, Scott? The process. I'll read it again just for future listeners. Semiotics is the systematic study of sign processes. It's separate from linguistics. Sign processes according to meaning making, like signs to meaning. So semiosis is any activity, conduct, or process that involves signs, where a sign is defined as anything that communicates something, usually called a meaning, to the sign's interpreter. So semiotics is like this overarching branch above linguistics, but it involves linguistics. So semiotics has like implications in computational theories and computer science and all that shit. Scott, you could probably explain that better than I could in terms of how semiotics works. Do you know anything about any of that? How it works in computer science?
Like syntax is.
Well, yeah, the syntax of a code language is how it works, but the semiotics would be how like the zeros and the ones respond to transistors, I guess.
Oh yeah. Whether you're talking about like hex or fucking, yeah. base 10 or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, like
Yes.
it's all different based on whatever system that you're using, but it's still just a fundamental set of ones and zeros that represent any sort of
Electrical input.
yeah, and that electrical input is like the representation of some sort of unit. It says this means this.
Doesn't have to be a 0 or a 1.
Yeah.
The 0 or the 1 is just an utterance from us,
Yay.
an idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just numbers.
with the 0 or the 1, it's more like the idea of like having something on or off, right? So like
Right.
that's why it's called binary. It's either on or off, and that's like 0 and 1s just represent that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's the simplest way to represent that through those two numbers.
Yep.
Interesting. That is, Perry said he's coming. But so that's semiotics. When we talk about semiotics, it is basically the foundations of language, assigning signs and meanings together. Body language, nonverbal communication, sign language, any type of linguistics is going to involve overall semiosis. So let us go back to the history of linguistics, since we've covered that again. Yada, yada, yada. Parents, is he here? He is. Aha.
Indubitably.
Excelsior. That's one you don't hear anymore. Excelsior. Indubitably, my dear Watson. Let's see what we got here. Okay. So we'll read us a couple of paragraphs, then we'll talk about it. So language was first systematically documented in Mesopotamian lexical lists of the 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE, so a long time ago, 5,000 years, offering glossaries on Sumerian cuneiform, usage and meaning, and phonetical vocabularies of foreign languages. So Sumerian cuneiform is not like we think of it today. It's not like a syntactic structure. Cuneiform is what they call in linguistics a logosyllabic script. So a logogram is basically a written character that represents a word or a morpheme. So it's weird because so cuneiform is a logosyllabic script that was used to write several languages of the ancient Middle East. The script was in active use from the early Bronze Age until the beginning of the Common Era, which is 0 AD. It is named for the characteristic wedge-shaped impressions which form its signs. So that was one of the first ways. I can read that here in a second, but let's see. So across cultures, the early history of linguistics is associated with a need to disambiguate discourse, lessen vagueness, especially in text or arguments. So this often led to explorations of sound meaning and mappings, semiosis, and the debate over conventional versus naturalistic origins for these symbols. Eventually, this led to processes by which larger structures of language are formed from individual units of language. So Babylonia, Sumeria, the earliest linguistic text written in cuneiform on clay tablets date almost 4,000 years before the present. However, in the early centuries of the 2nd millennium BCE in southern Mesopotamia, there arose a grammatical tradition that lasted for more than 2,500 years, which is the Sumerian language. The linguistic texts from the earliest parts of the tradition were lists of nouns in Sumerian, which the language had no genetic relatives. The language, Sumerian was the language of all legal and religious texts at the time. So Sumerian was slowly being replaced in everyday speech by a very different and unrelated language, Akkadian. Sumerian remained, however, as a language of prestige and continued to be used in religious and legal context. It therefore had to be taught as a foreign language, and to facilitate this, information about Sumerian was recorded in the writing by Akkadian-speaking scribes. So over the centuries, the list became standardized, and the Sumerian words were provided with Akkadian translations. Ultimately, text emerged that gave Akkadian equivalents for not just single words, but for entire paradigms of varying forms of words. One text, for instance, has 227 different forms of the verb gar, which means to place something. So, what does anybody think about that? Perry Scott, what we got? Don't leave me hanging.
Perry, go ahead, man.
Leave me hanging. Is Perry here?
Perry.
It's okay. Scott, you can go ahead if you had something to say. 227 different forms of the verb gar in Sumerian, which turned into Akkadian.
Yeah.
But it said that grammatical tradition lasted more than 2,500 years. So, what the hell is it? I've heard of Akkadian before.
Akkadian?
Have you? Yeah. It's okay.
It's Akkadian.
It's just another East Semitic language, Middle Eastern Mesopotamian language.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it was like, I don't know, something, man. I don't know, I guess I've always I've heard it before, like in terms of French. But that's probably something.
I have no idea the etymology of Akkadian language. You know, it probably is branched off into a trillion different things, but different linguistics and stuff. But apparently what it's looking like first is cuneiform on clay tablets that represents some kind of language without syntax. And then you've got the nouns that were written down in Sumerian. Sumerian was the one that lasted for 2,500 years so far, I guess. That's what it's saying. And then I guess it morphed into Akkadian, and then then that kind of blended together. 227 different forms of the verb. That's fucking crazy. So not an efficient language.
But that was 227 different forms over 2,500 years. Is it saying
I guess that's it said over the centuries the list of nouns in Sumerian became standardized.
Yeah.
But ultimately, text emerged that gave Akkadian equivalents for not just single words, but for the entire paradigms of varying forms of words. So it said one text, for instance, has 227 different forms of that verb. Yeah. So that's crazy. That's where language first came from, and back then it was probably. I mean, English is an extraordinarily complex language, whereas these ancient languages without syntax and predicate subjects and predicates and complex compound sentences and all this shit. You know what I mean?
So that's why pronouns are so important, right? So you don't have to have a different word for a tree at every phase that the leaves are growing, right? Because to me, when I hear that, they probably had a different word. Okay, when it's wintertime and the tree is bare, we call it this thing. But once it starts budding, we call it this thing. Once it's once there are leaves, we call it this thing. Once the leaves are falling off, we call it this thing. And now we just call it a tree, and we just use a pronoun to make an adjustment on what stage that tree is in, I guess.
Always changing, ever in flux. I could read about ancient Indian. I can read a little bit about it, but there's a shitload about it. Because obviously their culture goes back as far as Sumeria, basically, Babylonia. So let's see, read from my notes here. Linguistics in ancient India derives its impetus from the need to correctly recite and interpret the Vedic texts. Okay. Already in the oldest Indian text, the Rig Veda is deified. By 1200 BCE, the oral performance of these texts becomes standardized, and treatises on ritual recitation suggests splitting up the Sanskrit compounds into words, stems, and phonetic units, providing an impetus for morphology and phonetics. Okay, so here's a good time to explain what morphology is. So let me looking through my notepads and what Wikipedia pages and all kinds of shit. 1 second. Okay. So morphology is the study of words, how they are formed, and their relationship to other words in the same language. So morphology analyzes the structure of words and parts of words such as stems, root words, prefixes, and suffixes. So if you go look for what is an example of a morpheme? Prefixes such as, un, re, dis. Suffixes such as ed, ing. Base words such as help and form. Root words such as rupt, port, ject. Things like that. Morphology, and that's just in English. That's just English morphology. There's different morphologies for all languages. So we'll probably have to cover a little bit of more about morphology another day. But that's the basic idea. It also, morphology also looks at parts of speech like intonation and stress and what they call aspiration. Yeah, aspirated. So like different ways of context can change a word's pronunciation, meaning, and all this kind of stuff. Morphology differs from typology, which is a classification of language based on their use of words, and lexicology, which is the study of words and how they make up a language's vocabulary. Like a lexicon is the language's vocabulary. You could say someone had a personal lexicon. It all comes from the Greek word or Latin or Greek, I can't remember, lexis, which is, well, what is it remember again? Lexis. Make sure I'm reading this correctly, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so lexis is all the words in one language. That's what lexis means. So a lexicon is, so lexis is all the words. Lexicon is, our friend's name is lexicon, the vocabulary of a language or a person. So, I guess this doesn't mean every word, it just means the general vocabulary of it. Okay, I was just trying to understand that difference myself, guys. Sorry about that. All right, so we'll read a little bit more about Indian. Some of the earliest activities in the description of language have been attributed to Indian grammarian, which a grammarian is someone who studies grammar, obviously. Now this is weird because this dude is from the 6th century BCE, and his name is spelled, and I swear to God, it's spelled panini, like the sandwich. I love it. I'm just going to call him Panini. There's like a stress over there's a little symbol over the A. I'm just going to say Panini because it's funny.
Sounds delicious.
He's the Indian grammarian Panini, who wrote a rule. God, this is where I can't pronounce some of this shit, dude, because there's so many accents over these words. Holy hell. All of these Indian, they're just difficult to say in English, difficult to read in English, maybe not to say. But Panini is basically the main guy in the early BC days in India. So, he wrote a rule-based description of Sanskrit language. And over the next few centuries, they made up different types of morphologies to change that. And then there was this guy named Yaska, and Panini and Yaska had arguments against the morphology, the phonology, which is the sounds, and what is it called, the grammar. So they argued what was called it says of the 6 canonical texts of the Vedangas, yes, that formed the core syllabus in Brahminic education from the 1st century CE until the 18th century. 4 dealt with language. Shiksha, which is phonetics or phonology. Chandas, which is meter or like timbre or like intonation. Vyakarana, which is grammar. And then Nirukata, which is etymology. And these were just studied by Panini, Yaska, apparently some dude named Pingala. Some of these I can't pronounce. It's ridiculous. So that's basically, it says, apparently it lasted till the 18th century. That's interesting. So I imagine English was... Huh. Okay. Yeah, I guess so. So let's because that's not going to have a huge influence on what we need to understand. That's just a quick overview of a couple of the people in Indian. We want to know the Western stuff because that's where we live and that's what we have to deal with every day. So the Greeks, right? The Greeks developed an alphabet using symbols from the Phoenicians. And the Phoenician alphabet is an alphabet known in modern times from the Canaanite and Aramaic inscriptions found across the Mediterranean regions. So they added signs for vowels and for extra consonants appropriate to their specific idiosyncrasies. In the Phoenicians and in earlier Greek writing systems, such as Linear B, graphemes indicated syllables, that is, sound combinations of a consonant and a vowel. So graphemes are the smallest meaningful unit in a writing system, not a speaking system or a sign system, but the smallest meaning contrastive unit in a writing system, something that you can tell the difference between. So it says this can be a single letter or could be a sequence of letters, such as AI, SH, IGH, like I, and TCH, like tick. You know, that's what it's talking about. Graphemes, written forms. This gets a lot more complicated. I'm trying to be, because I don't understand the super complex versions of everything I'm trying to explain here. That's what we're going to dive deeper into later, but I'm just explaining it as easily as I can and as easy as I understand it. So I think that's a pretty good explanation of graphene. Anyway, so let me read a little bit more about here. Perry, have you found your earphones yet? Hello, Perry.
Yes.
Nice. Have you been listening to my diatribe?
Yep. Yeah,
That's what's up.
I agree. We should just stick to the Western methodologies, if you will.
Yep.
For linguistics and.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm here now. I found them. They were in the side of my car, side seat.
Sweet. I need to get a pair of, since I have the new phone now, I need to get a pair of Bluetooth headphones because there's no audio jack on this bitch. Like, for real.
Yeah, I need wireless headphones as well.
Fucking crazy. Amazing phone, no headphone jack. Oh well. Win some, you lose some. So let's see. We understand what graphemes are now. The addition of vowels by the Greeks was a major breakthrough as it facilitated the writing of Greek by representing both vowels and consonants with distinct graphemes. Okay? So vowels and consonants were separate things at this point in time now, whereas they weren't before in like Sumerian culture. You know, the syntax was different. So this is growing syntax is what we're talking about. As a result of the introduction of writing, poetry such as the Homeric poems became written and several editions were created and commented on, forming the basis of philology and criticism. Textual criticism. Now, philology is it's not hard to understand, but it's very broad. So I guess this originated with the Greeks as all things. But philology is the study of language in oral and written historical sources. It is the intersection of textual criticism, history, and linguistics, and strong ties to etymology. Etymology in linguistics is assumed. And for those who don't know, etymology is the study of the history of the form of words, how they change over time, just like the evolution of words. So philology is the intersection of textual criticism, historical textual criticism, history, and linguistics. So philology is like big to somebody like Bart Ehrman, right? Along with written speech, the Greeks commenced studying grammatical and philosophical issues, obviously. A philosophical discussion about the nature and origins of language can be found as early as the works of Plato. A subject of concern was whether language was man-made, a social artifact or epiphenomenon, or supernatural in origin. Plato in his, somebody can correct me here, Cratylus? Is that right? It doesn't matter.
I have no idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Plato in his writing Cratylus presents the naturalistic view that word meanings emerge from a natural process independent of the language user. What do we think about that? That's Plato right there. World of forms, right?
Yeah, so we've had this discussion whether language, and we could take math for example, is mind independent or mind dependent.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, well, I really don't know. I'm leaning towards that it's mind dependent right now. And even though, so we're taking math for example also, I think it was maybe the context was, is math mind independent? Because the universe seems to be well described using this language, or this bridge as you call it.
Why would it be so weird that a language that we develop, and we are made of nature, we are nature, that we would be able to describe it with that language? It seems trivial. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we can intuit physics because we are physics. But that's just me.
And I don't think that the universe cares what language we use to describe it. Like, I don't think the universe cares about math. I think the universe just is. So
math is just our best tool, mind dependently, to describe the supposed mind independent objective reality. Right? We're just describing. It's like a child looking at a beautiful painting, and they're not looking at the Mona Lisa like Leonardo da Vinci was. They're looking at it like a child would. You know, so
math being mind dependent, you see one and another one. You could show two as a representation of one and one. With language, you need to establish the meaning in the sound that's being used. It's not like you're just gonna, black can mean hello and it can mean fuck you. You have to establish, like when you're saying mind dependent.
yeah, that means anti-real. That means in here subjective.
Yeah. You have to. Yeah. So people have to be on the same page on what a sound would mean in it
Yeah,
being.
that's what we're talking about is semiotics and what words and morphemes and phonemes and all this stuff mean together, and that's why Perry and me wanted to study linguistics so much, because all this the semantics of something as opposed to the syntax of something is so different. Because when you get these morphemes and you have syntax which pieces all of these pieces together for sentences, that in some philosophical discourses they argue that the sentence means nothing. it doesn't even exhibit a proposition, which would be semantic. So it can go in all different ways. What's up, Perry? Did you pop in?
no, I haven't said anything.
Oh, who was that? I heard water or
You're
something.
looking at
Is that you,
Barry.
Scott?
He looked like he was popping in.
Oh, okay. My bad.
Yeah, like you describe the meaning of language, right?
Mm-hmm. I think you're picking up what we're putting down. I think you understand damn well what it is. Let's see. We'll read a little bit more about the Greeks, and then we'll move on. We'll get a little bit closer to, because I could read about China, but like I said, let's stay on the Western. It says along with the Sophists and Socrates introduced dialectics as a new text genre. The Platonic dialogues contain definitions of the meters of the poems and tragedy, the form and the structure of those texts. It says, see Plato's Republic. Aristotle supports the conventional origins of meaning. He defined the logic of speech and of the argument. Oh, okay. Furthermore, Aristotle's work on rhetoric and poetics became of the utmost importance for the understanding of tragedy, poetry, public discussions, rhetoric as text genres. So Aristotle's work on logic interrelates with his special interest in language, and his work on this area was fundamentally important for the development of the study of language, logos, which both means language and logical reasoning. In his categories, Aristotle defines what is meant by synonymous or univocal words, what is meant by homonymous. I can't pronounce that word. Yeah, that's it, homonymous, or equivocal words, and what is meant by paronymus or denominative words. He divides forms of speech as being either simple without composition or structure, such as man, horse, fights, etc., or having composition and structure, such as man fights, the horse runs, etc. So that's kind of how, he had this, Aristotle had this syntax, but it doesn't look like he had this full set of, like, it's just not English. You know what I mean? It probably wasn't anywhere nearly as diverse as English, with the ability to describe different, because he just broke it down into those two things: either simple without composition or having composition. So, okay. It says next he distinguishes between a subject of predication, namely that of which anything is affirmed or denied, and a subject of an adhesion. A thing is said to be inherent in a subject when though it is not part of the subject. Okay, these sentences are fucked. A thing is said to be inherent in a subject if it cannot possibly exist without the subject. Example: shape in a thing having a shape. That's interesting. That sounds like a linguistic problem right there. Shape in a thing having a shape. The categories are not abstract Platonic entities like Plato spoke about, but are found in speech. These are substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state of affairs, action, and affectation. In De Interpretatione, that's a hard. It's one of Aristotle's writings, De Interpretation. Aristotle analyzes categoric propositions, which propositions are just sentences, and a proposition is looking at the meaning of the sentence instead of just the word or the syntax or the structure. So Aristotle analyzes categoric propositions and draws a series of basic conclusions on the routine issues of classifying and defining basic linguistic forms, such as simple terms and propositions, nouns and verbs, negation, like not and things like that, the quality of simple propositions, like roots and quantifiers and symbolic logic, investigations of his laws of thought, and the problem of future contingents. So that gets into philosophy. We won't go into that. Let's talk about the Stoics real quick, and then I'll shut up. Anybody have anything to say on Aristotle's idea of linguistics? Scott, Perry, Nivik?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. It's all good. This isn't, like I said, we're not gonna get too crazy on this. There's not too much left. So let's see. The Stoics made linguistics an important part of their system of the cosmos and the human itself. They played an important role in defining the linguistic sign terms adopted later on by Ferdinand de Saussure. Saussure, okay. Interesting. The Stoics studied phonetics, grammar, and etymology as separate levels of study. So phonetics, again, is the branch of linguistics that studies how humans produce and perceive sounds, like speaking to each other and shit. And then phonology is the branch of linguistics that studies how language or dialects systematically organize their sounds, their actual sounds, for languages. So the phonetics are a part of phonology. The syllable, in phonetics and phonology, the articulators were defined. I forgot what articulators means. Okay. What's the easiest way to explain this? In philosophy, it'd be a truth bearer. Yes, a truth bearer. So the syllable became an important structure for the Stoics for the understanding of speech organization. So, of course, we all know what syllables are. It's the unit of organization for a sequence of speech sounds. So you've got phonemes in there, and then you've got a syllable. So like one syllable word is go. Two syllable word would be I'm trying to think of a simple. Would it be just would, right? Would, or I'm not sure. I'm not good at this. Doing it like
Hello.
like giving examples. Yes, hello.
Hello. Yeah.
What's wrong?
No, 2 syllables. Hello.
It's a
Oh,
two-syllable word, yeah.
You got me, Nivik. That was good. I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry. Yes, hello. 2-syllable word for the stone guy right here. Thank you, Nivik. That was good. All right, so so what we're finding out is that the Greeks made verbs. They made syntax more specific in their language. They invented the syllable, or the idea of what phonetic structure is in syllables. So, like, a phoneme in hell is he So, like, there's 2 phonemes in there. The h, the eh, and the ul. There's 3. Excuse me. There's 3 phonemes in there. So one of the most important contributions of the Stoics in language was the gradual definition of the terminology and theory echoed in modern linguistics. Okay. Interesting. It's saying that other Alexandrian grammarians studied notions such as nouns and verbs, and there was also a lot of discussion about the role of analogy in language in the discussion of grammatics amongst Alexandria, the city of Alexandria, and all the intelligent people that were there at the time. So Alexandrians, like their predecessors, were very interested in meter and its role in poetry. So the metrical feet in the Greek was based on the length of time taken to pronounce each syllable, with syllables categorized according to their weight as either long syllables or short syllables, like long and short vowels. What they called the foot is often compared to a musical measure, and the long and short syllables to whole notes and half notes. The basic unit in Greek and Latin prosody is a mora, M-O-R-A. A mora is a basic timing unit in the phonology of some spoken languages. So remember, we talked about phonology being the study of how languages or dialects organize their sounds, and then phonetics are the actual perceiving and producing of sounds. So a mora, as the Greek called it, is the timing unit in phonology for spoken languages. Okay, so a long syllable is equivalent to 2 moras. Interesting. A short syllable is defined 1 mora. A long syllable contains either a long vowel, a mora, or a short vowel followed by 2 or more consonants. So this is the way that they thought about it. Let's see if there's anything else important to cover about Greek, because they just keep doing this and doing this and doing this until it obviously becomes Latin, right? So 33 is syntax, man. So one of the most prominent scholars of Alexandria and of the antiquity was Apollonius Dioscolus. I bet it's Disolus. I've heard this name before, but I can't pronounce it. He's one of the greatest Greek grammarians. Apollonius Dioscolus. Yeah, that's it. Apollonius Dioscolus. Apollonius wrote more than 30 treatises on questions of syntax, semantics, which is meaning, morphology, which is the way they change words through putting stuff on the front and back of some things, prosody, which is the study of syllables, orthography, I forget what that is, and dialectology, which is different dialects in speaking and context. And it says No, that's it. Okay, that ends our. The writing on Wikipedia is so stupid sometimes. They just ended the sentence there and then kept going like it's a new paragraph. Okay. Anyway, lexiconography, which we talked about a second ago, which is the study of lexicons, the study of the how well lexiconography is basically how you put together a dictionary or how you make a written uh, lexicon of all the words in the language, lexis, all the words in the language. So lexiconography became an important domain of study as many grammarians compiled dictionaries, thesauri, and lists of special words that were old or dialectically special, such as medical words or botanical words at that time period. In the early medieval times, we find more categories of dictionaries like the Dictionary of Suida, considered the first encyclopedic dictionary, etymological dictionaries, etc. So, Suida, the Dictionary of Suida. Okay. The Suda or Suida is a large 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia of the ancient Mediterranean world, formerly attributed to an author called Sudas. Crazy. Okay, 10th century, one of the first, well, it's considered the first encyclopedic dictionary. So this is still back in, when did it say? Around Apollonius's time, right around the 80s. I just read this a second ago. Well, it doesn't say, but I assume it's right around the end of the BCs and right at 80 because that's where we dropped off a second ago. There's not too much on Greek on this page. This is Greek. So in the 4th century, Aelius Donatus compiled the Latin grammar, Ars Grammatica, that was to be the defining school text through the Middle Ages. A smaller version called Ars Minor covered only the 8 parts of speech. Eventually, when came to be printed in the 15th century, this was one of the first books to be printed along with the Bible. School children subjected to all this education gave us the current meaning of grammar. That was a quote, excuse me, by Elias Donatus. Elias? Yeah. Elias Donatus. So we could probably go on to another episode and speak about the Latin and its etymology and things like that, but they had an education system in Greece and Rome to where you had to learn the Ars Grammatica. It was taught to children, boys and girls. Well, I guess only boys. I don't know if they allowed the girls to learn. Probably not. But it was kind of like how Jewish kids have to go through learning their process as they grow up, the Jewish religion or whatever. But anyway,
Plato is actually somewhat of a feminist. I don't know if this was during Plato's time or not, but I know you quoted the Republic, and he says that women should be able to not only learn in school, but fight on the front lines if they're capable. So,
well, he was a logical man, right?
It was probably more towards the rise of Christianity where women really started getting, who knows, perhaps they were also repressed or oppressed during that time.
They were probably oppressed in non-religious cultures. Mm-hmm. Well, Greece wasn't a non-religious culture. They had the deities they worshipped, but within the realm of philosophy and the philosophers, there wasn't much religion going on. There was, I guess you could call it ancient secularity.
There was a bit of mysticism.
Yeah, there was.
But I know what you mean. Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, whatever school that you're referring to, I don't know if again this was like Plato's era, or if it was before or after or what, but yeah, just a fun little fact that I think Plato was more of a feminist, if anything, which is impressive 2,500 years ago, because nowadays, we still deal with those issues, which could just be a result of, like we mentioned, Western theology, but yeah.
The Dark Ages. Let's actually go to that. We'll jump from Rome. I don't if guys, if you really want to study, they have a website. Oh shit, let me look it up. It's a linguistics website. You can go study the etymology of like Chinese linguistics. Uh, doesn't matter, anywhere, basically any country in the world. Damn it, what is that website called? Um, when I think of it in a second, I'll tell you. But if you want to go learn more about Chinese and Indian, ancient Indian languages, definitely go read up on those because they're interesting as hell. But that's not how we're going to cover it because with my logic series and my epistemology series and everything, we're trying to stay Western world as much as we can. I will later on in later episodes probably talk about some mystical or spiritual traditions, maybe some of the dharmic traditions. We may have some episodes on, and maybe we'll learn a bit more about India and China and their history and stuff and their religions and things. But for the most part, we're going to stick to the Western. So the Middle Ages, it's separated it into Arabic grammar and European vernaculars. So interesting. Owing to the rapid expansion of Islam in the 8th century, many people learned Arabic as a lingua franca, a bridge language. Okay, common language. Trade language is what lingua franca means. Okay. It's a language systematically used to make communication possible between groups of people who do not share a native language or dialect. So I guess what that's saying is when Islam spread in the 8th century, many people just learned Arabic as their kind of like how in
We use
Europe
English.
most everyone's what I was going to say is how many people in Europe speak English, you know, uh, even though it's not their native language. So for this reason, the earliest grammatical treatises on Arabic are often written by non-native speakers of Arabic. Um, there's some words I can't pronounce here, so we're going to skip that part. The European vernaculars, let's see, the Irish Sanas Cormaic is Europe's first etymological and encyclopedic dictionary in any non-classical language. Interesting. The modiste, or speculative grammarians in the 13th century introduced the notion of universal grammar. That's interesting because universal grammar is what Noam Chomsky puts forth as like the genetic component, of language acquisition, that we have genetic modules of language already programmed into us by evolution. Apparently that was some kind of ideology in the 13th century. That's interesting to learn. Let's see, in quote, on the eloquence of vernacular, quote, Dante expanded the scope of linguistic inquiry from Latin and Greek to include the languages of the day during the Middle Ages. Other linguistic works of the same period concerning the vernaculars include the first grammatical treatise and I can't pronounce that name. I'm not even going to try. The Renaissance and Baroque periods saw an intensified interest in linguistics, notably for the purpose of Bible translations by the Jesuits, and also related to philosophical speculation of older philosophical languages and the origin of language itself. So, founding church fathers in the 1600s, Johann Becanus was the oldest representative of Dutch linguistics. He was the first person to publish a fragment of Gothic, mainly the Lord's Prayer. Franciscus Junius and George Hicks from England are considered to be the founding fathers of German linguistics. Okay. We are almost done, guys. I'm going to cover a little bit of modern linguistics and what historical linguistics is, and then I will explain a little bit more, and then I'll be done. But what did you want to say, Perry?
What year was that with the Germans, did you mention? If it says
1600s.
Interesting that they didn't include Martin Luther, because
he was 1500s.
Late 14, yeah, exactly. 1517, around there is when he wrote a translation of the Bible, or his seven sacraments, whichever it was, and had a huge. It was like the top seller
Yeah.
at the time. So I'm surprised that they didn't. And I guess it must have been from Latin to German for him. But that
Latin was probably still being spoken quite regularly as one of those lingua francas, common languages, like Arabic or whatever.
That's also really interesting because you said it was Arabic during the 8th century. That
You
was
cut
kinda,
out, Perry?
You said it was Arabic during the 8th century. That was kind of that middle language.
Yeah. Yeah, in the 8th century, the bridge language or the lingua franca was Arabic in that area in the Middle East.
Yeah, that probably was a result of. Well, I don't know. When was the Silk Road?
Ooh, I don't know. Let me look that.
Let's
Look it up.
Language type barriers.
When was the Silk Road? It's gonna take me to that fucking drug website. You know what I'm talking about? The Silk Road. From when Han Dynasty of China opened trade in 130 BCE until 1453 CE.
Gotcha. Yeah. So
when the Ottoman Empire closed off trade with the West.
After 700, 600 years of being on the Silk Road, I wouldn't be shocked if Arabic was one of the results of that.
Mm-hmm. It says the term instead refers to a network of trade routes used by traders for more than 1,500 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, like, both the Chinese and the Ottoman Empire, like, both of them at some point were thriving. Like, they were, with the influence they had around the world around them. But then all of a sudden they both decided to cut off from other parts of the world, and that made them stagnant to a certain degree. Like, how Europe basically got ahead of Asia for, the better part all the way through the 20th century. You could argue it's different now, but yeah, like they thought it was a good idea to close off from the rest of the world, and man.
If you don't trade, you fade.
Sure.
Trademarked.
If you don't trade, you fade, bro. That's why nobody wants to get in a war right now and fuck up their trade shit.
I mean, you fade either way, so.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get to modern linguistics and cover a little bit of that, and then we are done, and we'll open up the room to callers and tangents and bullshitting and whatever. Okay, so modern linguistics is akin to philology, like we talked about a minute ago. Philology is the intersection of historical textual criticism, history, and linguistics, and we're studying linguistics right now in the Western tradition. So modern linguistics did not begin until the late 18th century, and the Romantic or animist theses of Johann Gottfried Herder and Johann Christoph Adelung remained influential well into the 19th century. In the history of American linguists, there were hundreds of indigenous languages that were never recorded. Many of the languages were spoken, not written, and so they are now inaccessible. Under these circumstances, linguists such as Franz Boas tried to prescribe sound methodical principles for the analysis of unfamiliar languages. So he was trying to figure it out. Boas was an influential linguist and was followed by Edward Sapir and Leonard Bloomfield. So in modern linguistics, they look at it from like a bunch of different ways, and they look at it through general linguistics, theoretical linguistics, descriptive linguistics, applied linguistics, and psycholinguistics. There's also subfields under those that we'll get into in later episodes. But historical linguistics is what I will cover at the moment. And it's basically the scientific study of language changing over time, how it changed over time. We learn that through textual criticism. That's why philology is so important, because we have to intersect and interconnect those three things to be able to tell how an older language, through etymology and through the historical linguistic tracing, got to where it is to, now, what it is now. So without, I can't talk. So during the 18th century, conjectural history, let's see what that is. Conjectural history is a type of historiography isolated in the 1790s by Dugald Stewart, who termed it theoretical or conjectural history, as prevalent in historians and early social scientists of the Scottish Enlightenment. So I guess with conjectural history, they're talking about not a scientific based history, I would imagine, not a textual critical take. But it says, during the 18th century, conjectural history, based on a mix of linguistics and anthropology, on the topic of both the origin and progress of language and society, was fashionable. So linguistics was a big deal in the 18th century. These thinkers contributed to the construction of academic paradigms in which some languages were labeled primitive relative to the English language. Okay, so we're going to hear a little bit of just wait. Within this paradigm, a primitive people could be discerned by their primitive language, as in the case of Hugh Blair, who argued that Native Americans gesticulated wildly to compensate for a poor lexicon of their primitive language. God, that's so horrible to read. Around the same time, James Burnett authored a 6-volume treatise that delved more deeply into the matter of savage languages. Ugh. Other writers theorized that Native American languages were, quote, nothing but the natural and instinctive cries of the animal, quote, without grammatical structure. Horrible. The thinkers within this paradigm connected themselves with the Greeks and Romans and viewed them as the only civilized persons of the ancient world, a view articulated by Thomas Sheridan, who compiled an important 18th century pronunciation dictionary. Quote, it was to the care taken in the cultivation of their languages that Greece and Rome owed that splendor which eclipsed all other nations of the world. So in the 18th century, James Burnett and Lord Monboddo analyzed numerous languages and deduced logical elements of the evolution of human languages in general. His thinking was interweaved with his precursive concepts of biological evolution. Some of his early concepts have been validated and are considered correct today. In the Sanskrit language 1786, a writing, Sir William Jones proposed that Sanskrit and Persian languages had resemblances to classical Greek, Latin, Gothic, and Celtic languages. From this idea sprung the field of comparative linguistics and historical linguistics. Okay, so comparative linguistics is the branch of historical linguistics that is concerned with comparing languages and their historical relatedness. And historical linguistics, obviously, is what I just read earlier, the scientific study of how a language changes over time. Similar with etymology is how words and specific parts of sentences and languages change over time. So through the 19th century, European linguistics centered on the comparative history of the Indo-European languages, with a concern for finding their common roots and tracing their development. So, and almost done. In 1786, it was discovered that there is a regular sound that corresponded in the languages spoken in Europe, India, and Persia. This led to the conclusion that all the languages came from a common ancestor, and during the 19th century, linguistics were devoted to figuring out the nuances of that parent language. It was discovered that this parent language started approximately 6,000 years ago and has developed into English, Russian, and Hindi. In the 1820s, Wilhelm Humboldt observed that human language was a rule-governed system, anticipating a theme that was to become central in the formal work on syntax and semantics of language in the 20th century. Okay? Syntax is how the words and sentences are put together. Semantics is the meanings of propositions. Sentences as propositions, a meaning of something, a truth maker, truth bearers. Of this observation, he said that it allowed language to make infinite use of finite terms. Cool. Humboldt's work is associated with the movement of Romantic linguistics, which was inspired by the Romantic sciences. Other notable representatives of the movement include Friedrich Schlegel, and Franz Bopp. It was only in the late 19th century that neo-grammarian approach Karl Brugmann and others included a rigid notion of sound law. Sound law. Interesting. I'll have to look into that. Historical linguistics has also led to the emergence of the semantics and some forms of the pragmatics, which we will cover later, semantics and pragmatics. Historical linguistics continues today, and linguistics has succeeded in grouping approximately 5,000 languages of the world into a number of common ancestors. So what we will cover, there's also descriptive linguistics and structuralism and post-structuralism to discover, to delineate, to elucidate. So I'll just read strictly real quickly about structuralism. In Europe, there was a development of structural linguistics initiated by Ferdinand de Saussure, Saussure. So I'm thinking that's Saussure. A Swiss professor of Indo-European and general linguistics, whose lectures on general linguistics, published posthumously by his students, set the direction of European linguistics analysis from the 1920s on. His approach has been widely adopted in other fields under the broad term structuralism. There's also post-structuralism. By the 20th century, the attention shifted from language change to the structure, which is governed by rules and principles. So it said the attention shifted from language change, from from language change to the structure. So the attention by the 20th century, I'm translating here. By the 20th century, the attention shifted from language change to syntax, which is governed by rules and principles. This structure turned into more grammar, and by the 1920s, structural linguistics was developing into sophisticated methods of grammatical analysis. So we will get into, like I said earlier, just wrapping up here, we will get into theoretical linguistics and the sub-branches, descriptive linguistics, applied linguistics, and probably some psycholinguistics and a few other subfields. There's going to be a lot more on linguistics because it's a big topic, and we will definitely cover semantics because that's probably the most important part, the meaning of all this shit that we're talking about being put together. All these morphemes and phonemes and syllables and structures of morphology in a sentence and syntax, just all this stuff. It just takes a lot to sink in. But remember, guys, as me and Perry have talked about and everybody else, linguistics is at the base of everything. Because I don't even know if, and Perry can come in at any time he wants to here, I don't even know if we can have any a priori thoughts without some form of language in our brain to separate the thoughts. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've been trying to stop thinking about this recently because it's been fucking mentally draining me and hindering my normal daily activities. Because it's so puzzling.
Then let's not do that to you then.
Well, I mean, it's not beneficial when I do it amongst myself, but since there's other people listening, it is now beneficial.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that anything, even if you put it theologically, mystically, spiritually, I don't think. And this is why I base my belief that everything is eternal, because there is always the question of infinite regress. What was before that? But we're talking about a priori, right? And that nothing.
Right. We're talking about.
Right.
We're real quick. We're talking about as if, let's say you wanted to come to the conclusion that A equals A in your brain. If you didn't have any linguistic structure, mathematical or otherwise, how could you even come to that concept? Do you see what I'm saying?
So, yeah, another topic that has taken much space in my head. Yeah, I don't know. And someone like Wittgenstein would say, which you will get to at some point.
No, go ahead.
But he would say that the glass and the water in the glass don't have any meaning and aren't actually concepts until we put that linguistic structure on it.
Yeah.
Something like love, I think he may have used as an example. I mean, we wouldn't know what love was.
Love is just an utterance, right? It's an utterance to describe an attitude or an affectation of feeling.
And I guess that's probably where the argument goes, is that even to say that we have a concept, you only know what I'm talking about because I just said the word concept. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't even be able to use that
I knew what the syntax of the word concept is. I know it's got syllables. I know it's got phonemes in it. I know it's a morpheme, right? Because it's got a piece on. So yeah.
And so this begs the question, though. It's like, who is the first caveman, or who is the first Cro-Magnon, or whatever they were called, to say something, utter something? I guess they'd have to be simultaneously doing something like drinking water, and then they make a noise, and now they're able to correlate those two actions with each other.
Semiosis, making the sign and the meaning, right?
It begs the question, like, is that idea, are those shapes and pictures in your head, are those there regardless of if you have any linguistic capability?
I don't know. I mean, if we have if we have this universal language where we have a genetic component to learn language in our biology, like Chomsky says, then I forgot where the hell I was going. That's why I shouldn't smoke while I'm doing this.
I think it's in your head. You just have to communicate it is all.
Yeah.
I think intent also it should possibly be mentioned here because, like I said with the water, did that, we'll call him a caveman just for the hypothetical. Did the caveman make an utterance while drinking water because he wanted to communicate? Was there an intent of communication? Or did the other cavemen just see him do that and now they say, oh, water. Water means ooh. So whenever they're thirsty, right, now they're going to say ooh. And that's, I don't know if that's where the original question, I think you mentioned a priori with language, but that's like,
yeah. Could you come to an a priori? Could you come to the a priori conclusion that A equals A, or that 1 is 1, if you didn't have any language system whatsoever? If you didn't have a pre-programmed language system in your brain genetically?
Yeah, I mean, no. I think that's a rhetorical question because you're asking, could someone know A equals A? But that's a linguistic term that you just use, and if they don't know anything about linguistics, then no, they're not going to know what that means.
I mean, without any, I don't know if there ever has been a human as such in my theoretical thought experiment that I'm talking about here, but without some kind of language, even if they made it up in their own head, they'd have to have some kind of language, something to separate the thoughts in order to comprehend logic, I would assume.
And language doesn't need to be utterances either. You can move your fingers in a certain position and communicate that way.
Right.
So, I mean, can you say that A equals A without having that structure of those syntactical structures? Is that the question?
I guess so. I mean, I'm thinking in an extreme case, right? I'm thinking in the we're a blank slate kind of thing, which I shouldn't think that way because the best evidence we have now is Chomsky's shit. So
there's many forms of communication. You can see a person do certain things and make certain sounds, and a certain act will come of those things. It's kind of like poker, right?
What was the intent of that agent doing those things, though? Was he doing it to try and communicate, or are you just now correlating the position, what
he does with the acts that are done, like with the sound or the gesture, like a sign, like a person you tell. It's in a way. It's. I mean, it is. There's just
So,
different. There's many ways to communicate. Is what I'm saying.
I mean, we have to try and think of a very prehistoric type of being here, not very smart, just on the verge of being able to use language. I mean,
Right.
maybe like you said, they were using those gestures and those signs way before they started making utterances. If I'm crawling and very weak and nimble and I'm about to die, I mean, perhaps someone else would be able to see by that gesture. I mean, that is.
I mean, the
essentially a
first
type of
linguistics
language.
during the time you're talking about is probably just yelling. When you wanted to get someone's attention, you go
Hmm.
or the same
Hmm.
thing. If you wanted water, you'd point at the water and go ah, or I'm sure it started out as something like that with
It was
zero
just raw
syntax.
noise,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
zero structure to it.
yeah. That's what I'm thinking anyway. But I mean, that we would need biological linguistics to tell us that. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, I'm
And
not sure
that's
if it can
where.
be established because, like, kids they start with nothing. It's not like there's any type of establishment there.
No,
And
well, that's what we were talking about, Nibbit. Kids don't start with nothing. With Noam Chomsky, the linguist, Noam Chomsky has
so when a
said that
baby's
we have.
born,
Hang on a second, 1 second. I'm gonna let you respond. I swear. We now understand through the best work that Noam Chomsky has done in linguistics that there is a genetic component, a universal language component in all children when they're born to be able to learn language inherently. That is usually the model that I follow,
okay.
but I'm sure there's different interpretations.
So by that logic, a baby's born, right? It happens to be an Indian baby, but it's born and raised in the United States. That baby should therefore automatically speak Indian, right?
No,
I
because
don't
you could
think so.
have it. Well, so what Noam Chomsky is saying is no, no. What he's saying
No,
is that
yeah.
there is a syntactical structure, which pretty much all languages have some sort of syntactical structure.
Hmm.
My question for
We have
Chomsky.
real quick. I'm
Hmm.
sorry. We have an intuition about how to learn language when we're children. Obviously, it's a lot of the environment, but nature and nurture is a lot of it. But nature, I think, I'm along with Chomsky on this. We do have some genetic module or construct that allows us to learn this syntactic structure, this all these phonemes and morphemes and stuff. I mean, I just don't see a blank slate being viable anymore. Do you?
So when you say that genetically we just have this innate language structure, is it? I mean, what does that look? Is it like a? Is it a DNA code? Is it a DNA protein or whatever that we have that where he can single out? Because what if it's just our sensory apparatus, and that same apparatus that we use to sense things is the same thing that we've used to create language.
Okay, let's read it real quick. Universal grammar in modern linguistics is the theory of the genetic component of the language faculty, usually credited to Noam Chomsky. So the basic postulate of universal grammar is that there are innate, intrinsic constraints on what the grammar of a possible human language could be. So when
Oh,
linguistic
okay.
stimuli are received in the course of language acquisition, children then adopt specific syntactic rules that conform to the universal grammar. The advocates of this theory emphasize and partially rely on the poverty of the stimulus. So the poverty of the stimulus is the controversial argument from linguistics that children are not exposed to rich enough data within their linguistic environments to acquire every feature of their language. So let me read that. Let me read that again because that's important. Poverty of stimulus is the controversial argument from linguistics that children are not exposed to rich enough data within their linguistics environments to acquire every feature of their own language. This is considered evidence contrary to the empiricist idea that language is solely learned through experience, which would be the blank slate.
That's a very interesting way to make an argument. So they're saying since there's a constraint on our sensory datum apparati,
It does say,
that
however, the latter has not been firmly established, as some linguists have argued languages are so diverse that such universality is rare. It is a matter of empirical investigation to determine precisely what properties are universal and what linguistic capacities are innate. So I guess it's still a thing, argued thing.
yeah, it's a bold claim to say that they're not exposed into rich enough sensory environments in order to be able to learn that kind of stuff a posteriori. I think that the brain is very sponge-like, especially at that age, for whatever reason. And I mean, perhaps that's the argument that one should make, is how adaptable the brain is at that age. I don't know. I mean, the rate at which you learn at that age is very high, it seems to me. So to say that we're impoverished in our sensory perception, so there's no way that we could just a posteriori and empirically learn from the environment. I don't know. I think that's a bold claim.
By the way, I was watching this interview with Agassi, and they're saying like, "Man, you're so good in being responsive." And Agassi was saying, there's a little secret to that. I never really told anybody. I never reacted to anything. The difficulty that I had was trying to hide from my opponent that I was reading them. And I already knew what they were going to do before they were going to do it, because they'd have tells. So every time the person will go up, he's looking at what they do, and then by how they act, he knows that they're gonna hit wide, or they're gonna hit down the center, or they're gonna hit in the body. So he wasn't never really anticipating. He was already predicting what was going to happen based off of reading the tells off of his opponent.
I got you. Real quick, Perry, what were you just saying at the end there? Repeat your last part.
I think it's a bold claim to say that that their sensory apparatus are too impoverished.
So you think it's a blank slate?
Yeah, I think that it's a spectrum, and it's not either one omniscient or two the blank slate. It is more tuned toward the blank slate, depending on what words you would use to describe what actually is innate. As Noam Chomsky is saying, that it's our linguistic cognitive modules or whatever.
Let's real quick. His theory is only 2 paragraphs, so just real quick, okay? Chomsky argued that the human brain contains a limited set of constraints for organizing language. This implies in turn that all languages have a common structural basis, or the set of rules known as universal grammar. Speakers proficient in a language know which expressions are acceptable in their language and which are unacceptable. The key puzzle is how speakers come to know these restrictions of their own language, since expressions that violate these restrictions are not present in the input indicated as such. Chomsky argued that this poverty of stimulus that I just described a minute ago means that B.F. Skinner's a psychologist. Chomsky argued that this poverty of stimulus means that Skinner's behavioral perspective cannot explain language acquisition, which would be through the environment, through behaviors. The absence of negative evidence, which would be evidence that an expression is a part of a class of ungrammatical sentences in a given language, is the core of Chomsky's argument. For example, in English, an interrogative pronoun like what cannot be related to a predicate within a relative clause, like the sentence, quote, "What did John meet a man who sold?" Quote, "What did John meet a man who sold?" Such expressions are not available to language learners. They are, by hypothesis, ungrammatical. So speakers of the local language do not use them and would not note them as unacceptable to language learners. And would note them as unacceptable to language learners. Universal grammar offers an explanation for the presence of the poverty of the stimulus by making certain restrictions into universal characteristics of human languages. So that's basically what he said. I guess maybe if we got deeper into his language acquisition device, what he talks about, like the LAD as he calls it, maybe if we got deeper into that, we could understand the evolutionary biology implications of this. But this is just it's not worded perfectly, but that was a very broad case of what he's talking about.
Okay. Yeah, I don't disagree that there are constraints on human language. I think that's pretty clear. I don't think that
Yeah.
initiates any negative evidence of. I mean, it's just the fact that our language and how we understand meaning and whatnot is a result of conforming to past ways of talking and uttering things. I mean, maybe if I said, John who met the man who sold, or whatever ungrammatical sentence you created, that that could make sense in some alternate universe
Yeah.
where we've created language from a different origin.
But
Scott?
I think Perry's on the right track here. So I would go a different step, Perry. So I would say, like, when I think about the human language being limited, it means like we don't have like a set of like color patterns that we see that means something to us, and we can't hear anything above 20,000 hertz, right? So there are limitations on the way that we can take in information, right? But the language in and of itself is like you have an infinite amount of ways to describe yourself. It's like the idea of like a piano with 88 keys. You have an infinite amount of possibilities, and this is fucking true. You know, like it's a
Almost
really
infinite. Almost infinite.
almost infinite.
Almost infinite.
I would say for all intents and purposes, infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To a human, definitely infinite.
Yeah, but the constraints, and like I do think a lot of the time these guys are getting down into like the real fucking weeds of it, and getting down to the point where I'm going, where it's saying, okay, we recognize that the limitations on human language is something that, you know, we just don't have any way to take in information, right? Because all these guys recognize that there's the fact that we make words all the time. We make up new ways to explain things and do this. This is completely normal.
Yep. I don't believe in the blank slate. I think that we have biological and genetic memory markers in us that allow us to have modules such as emotions, and modules such as intellect, and modules such as language acquisition. There's biological not programming. I don't want to say well, fuck it, I'll say there's biological programming in there. It's not just a blank slate. But I don't know if we have like a specific, you know, we, like Chomsky says, we learn these specific common language structures. I mean, that would be through culture and society that we would learn not to say, "What did John meet a man who sold?" Right?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. I think in this situation, I do think Chomsky is wrong, right? Because there are languages out there that are just like, right? And so like it really doesn't matter. And like I think people sort of get locked into this notion that here's the language that's permeated, here's the one that's been successful, so that's the way it ought to be, that's the way it has to be, this is the fundamental way, and it's meant to be this way. Bullshit. It could be any fucking way. It really doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Right. So
well,
the blank slate thing, to me, I don't know. I do think it's true, because I don't think just because we have the ability uh, to create and understand languages doesn't mean we don't have a blank slate when it comes to knowledge, right? We obviously do, in my
Maybe when it
opinion.
comes to knowledge, yeah. I mean, that's going to be a more difficult thing with,
Yeah,
but
because nobody
you have
says
the
like,
same structures of your genetics from your parents. So I mean,
yes,
there's some biology in there, some genetic memory, if you will, some RAM
yeah,
that
yeah,
is, yeah.
but does anybody ever refer to like the blank slate as like with somebody who's like somebody who can just jump higher than everybody else, right? No, this is like natural innate abilities. Like it's not referred to as a blank slate. And to me, I guess I always think about these things in that same kind of sense. It's just abilities that we have, and it has nothing to do with like anything special about you jumping 6 feet, right? Like that's not the thing in of itself.
I got you.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it still be a blank slate with Chomsky's theory? Because, I mean, what actually is a blank slate? A blank slate is something on which, like, the predicates of a blank slate is that you're able to write on it. Similarly, blank, the
Yeah.
genetic blank slate
Is
is,
the
I mean, you got
genetics
to start
blank
with
slate.
something. You can't actually just have nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, there's got to be some,
Terry. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
In that situation, the genetics is the slate. It's the piece of fucking rock that you're
right,
writing into, right?
exactly. Yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah,
So when, I mean,
I mean,
we're
we're
definitely
born with
not,
hard drives and shit's on those hard drives. There's
right.
firmware. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Exactly, exactly.
okay, so this is where now we're getting into it. You're saying that there's like stored data in there that is
No, no,
benign and
no,
waiting
no.
to be unlocked?
No, no, no. Firmware is just like saying, like, okay, like if I have a computer, I can have 8 gigs of RAM or I can have 64 gigs of RAM. That RAM isn't doing anything. There's nothing in that RAM until you start running your computer. But there's a difference between having 8 gigs of RAM once you start running programs and 64 gigs of RAM.
Sure. Okay. I that's fine. But do you think, Thomas, more so is where I'm heading this.
Do you know
Do
what I
you
mean by
think
firmware? Do you know what I mean by firmware?
I'm going to ask a separate question that, and we can get into firmware after and to see if I do know what it means. But let me just ask you this question. I think it's good independent. Do you think that there is information stored in us that is dormant and waiting to be unlocked by some visual or some sensory datum? Or do you think that just our sensory data is those ideas that we now think of and perceive? Or do you think that they were in us innate?
I don't know on that one. I don't think, I mean, when I say that we have a hard drive and it's got firmware, I'm not necessarily saying anything is on that hard drive other than the firmware. The firmware is just like,
Right.
this is
Yep.
an analogy, this is a metaphor, but the firmware is like, how can you explain it easily, Scott? It's the base programming of like, I mean, even
Yeah.
processors have firmware in them.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So like you could have like an Intel Pentium or an Intel i5 or an Intel i7, and that's just a differentiation with how many bits of information this processor can process, right? It doesn't there's no information being pushed through it at all yet, right? And that's the firmware, right?
You have to have firmware for your GPU. You have to have firmware.
Yep.
Everything in a computer has to have firmware in order for it to operate in the first place. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has any data on it. It could be a blank computer.
Yeah,
That's what I would call the blank slate, essentially.
firmware is the same thing as like hardware. So it's like we're just talking about like the hardware versus the software. Like to me, like I think
Yeah, let
for
me find a good explanation of firmware.
well,
What I mean by maybe I mean
well,
different
because
things.
with like firmware, you have like BIOS, like a BIOS, right? You can do like a
Yeah,
firmware update.
so it's permanent software programmed into read-only memory on circuit
And
boards.
on certain boards, yeah,
Yeah.
and
So permanent
that's just basic
software
instructions.
programmed into read-only memory on circuit boards.
Yeah, and this is just like basic instructions of saying like,
Yes.
okay, here are all the pieces of this motherboard, um, and here's how information that comes to this point it needs to be routed in this specific way. That's what firmware does.
It's intrinsic to the whatever
It
it's
is
intrinsic software to whatever device is in the computer.
exactly. Yeah, and like
So it has to be there for the hard drive has to have firmware in it, or it can't do the hard drive functions. Doesn't
yeah,
mean that the hard drive has anything on it other than it's uh,
what's
directories and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is something you'll fundamentally know, Perry. Like, so have you ever taken a pair of USB headphones and plugged them into your computer? And what does your computer do? It instantly recognizes those as headphones. Why? Because in the USB chip, they actually print on there. This is headphones, right? But if you plug in a thumb drive that's a storage media, your computer is going to pop up and say, do you want to open this drive? Do you want to view the files on this drive? Because
Right.
it knows the difference based on what's on like the actual ones and zeros that are imprinted on like the read-only memory. You can't change
Mm-hmm.
it on those. Like it just is what it is, right?
So
Yeah.
is the biological human brain a type of firmware that decodes the ones and zeros of utterances that we make?
No, the brain would be the hardware, and I think the I don't know. I think the natural inclination for people to be able to have language, that's the firmware. I mean, it's something like we don't even know what
Mm.
consciousness is, but we
Yes.
can't put our finger on it. But that's the
Well,
basic
it's
analogy.
like genetically knowing how to suck on your mother's teat when you're born.
Yes,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? That is firmware. It's not.
Hmm.
It's instinctually programmed. This genetic memory. That's kind of how I think about language. Is this genetic memory or this genetic module that allows syntactic structure to be understood. And
So,
I assume that's because our parents did it and their parents did it and their parents did it. You know what I mean? So
right. So, but is sucking on the mother's teat, did the baby do that first thing out the womb, or did the mother nurse it to do that? And after it experienced it that one time, it's like, oh man, this is the bee's knees. I got to get more of that.
I
Or
mean,
did it?
it's a
Probably,
fitness payoff, obviously, to
yeah,
get fed,
yeah.
right?
It's probably both, right? Why can't it be both?
The mother has to
Well,
do what's
if it
called
overlaps, then why is there even
well,
a discussion about? You know
real
what I mean?
quick. The mother has to do what's called mirroring when they first get their child. They have to mirror the images of their face and all this kind of because the babies don't have object permanence, yet they still know to suck on the mother's teat. I mean, I don't think it's as soon as they're born. I think it's within weeks of being, or it's probably within days of being born. I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
mean,
And
like
so
a baby will like latch on like pretty much right away once they like clean it
okay.
off and like do all that kind of shit. Boom, it's
Yeah,
like
so the mom mirrors the baby, gets the correct affectation there for the emotion because the baby doesn't have object permanence. It doesn't, if you turn away, the face is gone. So how does it know to recognize mother's face, teat? That's what I'm calling firmware.
that's
see.
what
So
I'm
it's,
asking. Like,
I
is it
would
the mother that
I
produces
would
that,
take it
or
even
is it the
I
baby?
well I would take it even further than that. I would say the firmware is that baby knows I need to ingest food for energy,
Yeah,
right?
the fitness
And
payoff.
that's
Yeah,
yeah, and that's what it really comes down to. Like a baby, when you see them, like they're like right with their firstborn, like they'll you know they want something, right? And like they'll even start making like a motion with their lips once they're hungry, like before they can say anything or do anything. Like they're giving clues to like their biological needs right off the bat.
well, they're programmed by evolution. Those modules are in there
Exactly.
because otherwise we would die off if we didn't
Exactly.
attach to the mother's teeth. So there was a fitness payoff way
Yeah.
back when we first started to immediately being able to suck on the mother's teeth because the ones that didn't probably died,
Yeah. Yeah.
probably died, right? So
Exactly. That I mean, there are babies that won't do it. Like before they had formula for babies, like many babies died because they wouldn't fucking
what was
produce
your
enough milk.
question, Perry? What was your question? Is it more the mother or is it what?
the question is does the baby out of the womb yearn because it knows it innately has the survival instinct to suck on the mother's teat?
It doesn't know.
Or did the mother do her faces or whatever and put the baby to her teat, and now the baby yearns for that after a posteriori it's had that experience?
Yeah, but
well, there had to be a first experience. I understand what you're saying on that.
What came first, the chicken
Right,
or the
I get
egg?
the I get the question, but it had to all kind of happen together a little bit, because if the mother didn't mirror to the child and the child didn't recognize that was its mother, then I don't know if it would latch onto the teat. I don't know if babies latch onto other mothers' teats.
they do. Back in the
They
day,
do?
like
Okay.
yeah. Back in the day, you used to have like what people know as midwives, but like rich
Yeah,
people back in
midwives.
the day would just like hand
Yeah.
off their babies to like the lady who was raising
Okay,
them.
so maybe it's not so much. Maybe I guess it really depends on the baby. I guess really specifically,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, I would guess that it's the mother putting it up to the breast first, of course, and the baby. The baby has the firmware in it it's not like it knows. It's not like it has knowledge, like a justified true belief or anything. It doesn't know. It is instinctually, what is that word called? Instinctually.
Intrinsic, innate.
Yeah, they instinctually
biological.
possessed. Let's say that is instinctually possessed.
Motivated.
Yes, there we go. Thank God.
I mean, it could have just been idiot peasants who didn't breastfeed their kids, and their kid died, and that's how they passed on the genes. It didn't have to be like a whole generation of successful humans that just died off because all of a sudden they stopped breastfeeding.
Yeah, but I mean,
to
to assume that that's the case, and it's like, oh, it's just these idiots that are doing it. To me, it seems that's a bit of a stretch. But you said something, Perry, that sort of perked my ears. You said, "Does the baby know? Does it have an instinct?" And it seemed to me that you were using instinct and knowledge in the same framework. To me, I don't consider those the same thing at all, right? So like it's instinctual if like a ball gets thrown at your face for you to flinch. You can't control this. This is just like an autonomic response. That's instinct.
Yeah, I
There's
don't think
no
I
knowledge
actually
involved.
was trying to make like an epistemological claim for the baby. I do agree with your distinction between instinct and knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what I'm saying is the instinct, because I mean, isn't that Noam's position, that we have these instinctual, innate, intrinsic, genetic structures that we can't just learn them and know them all of a sudden. He believes. I mean, I'm doing the steel man on Chomsky's part. He thinks that it is born in us and genetically passed down through natural selection, yada yada yada. And I mean, I guess I also brought up, like, we can see empirically that if a baby doesn't get breastfed and it dies, we can correlate these sort of things, and that's potentially a reason why we don't see that nowadays, because we learn. We learn from our mistakes. I mean, I think natural selection.
Okay.
Yeah,
But so if it's natural selection, imagine every human being except like 1,000 breeding pairs die off, and these 1,000 breeding pairs have no access to any information. And this happens for like 15 generations, where they have no access to any information at all. Do you think it would be any different, right?
In terms of what, the reproduction.
Of the knowledge of what you're saying with Noam Chomsky, of him saying like there's this natural innate ability for having I don't know. I guess like
language.
a specific, but not just a language, like a specific form of language, right? Like, because he's not just saying like language in and of itself. He's talking about like deeper things of like the way language is structured, and he's saying that that's where the instinctual part comes in because
I'm
we
not
evolve that way.
I'm not entirely sure your 1,000 pairs of breeders. I'm not entirely sure where you're going with that hypothetical, but if maybe this is what you're getting at, we have already, there's nothing we can do about it. We have these structures that have been built from the bottom up, wherever the bottom was. It might be infinity, but it's gone in that direction from the bottom up. And if we were to, I think in the hypothetical you said, like, get rid of the 7.8 billion people and just leave 1,000. So where were you going with that? That the language, the intrinsic language that Chomsky is arguing for, would be there or wouldn't be there? Is that your question?
I don't think some of the things he argued for would be there. I think the ability to have language would be there. But like, I mean, this is why like I said earlier, like I look at it as like an ability, the same way like somebody has like a specific athletic ability, right? All humans sort of have the ability to do certain things for the most part, right?
Well,
Because there are people who are born who don't have the ability to speak, who don't understand language in any fucking stretch of the imagination,
yeah,
right?
okay. I
They're
mean,
they're locked in, right? And like,
there are, uh, I mean, don't bees have language amongst themselves? Don't chimps and
oh yeah, 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 yeah,
don't
absolutely,
dolphins and everyone?
absolutely, absolutely,
So, but and I believe that these biological creatures have the capability for language.
yeah,
What Chomsky is saying, I think, is that we have this innate syntactical structure.
exactly.
Right.
And
Okay.
that's what I disagree with because I don't think that's where I was going with like the 1,000 breeding pairs because I don't think
Hmm.
the innate syntactical structure would be the same because you could do that like imagine that same experiment you just take 1,000 breeding pairs and spread them out across the universe and see what happens. Do
It's
you
a tough
think?
hypothetical, though, because are they going to be speaking English? Are they going to have any
Oh
knowledge
no,
of
no,
the
they're not going to have
previous?
any. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
That's the point, Barry. Just like on Earth, like 2,000 years ago, nobody spoke English,
But
right?
even
Like,
then, that might be somewhat of a nonsensical hypothetical because what humans right now, which we
yes,
evolved out of Cro-Magnums and Homo sapiens that also had linguistic skills,
yes,
and I
yes.
mean because we were,
But here's the point that I'm making is when right now we're humans, we're all on Earth, and there's some sort of interaction. So anytime this thing happens on Earth, we're all connected. And what I'm saying is break away that connection. So there is no longer that connection to where language came from for us, for human beings, where we are right now. And you broke it apart a thousand times to the thousandth power. Language would be so drastically different. We wouldn't it would take
yeah.
scholars billions of years to probably figure it out, like how to
I
relate
mean,
it
if the
all, just because
multiverse
it's
theory is true, then we're having a similar discussion in completely
yes,
different ways.
yes, exactly.
All layered on each other too.
All yeah,
Interestingly.
exactly.
Let me read this real quick. This is the argument for universal grammar. Okay, the theory of universal grammar proposes that if human beings are brought up under normal conditions and not of those of extreme sensory deprivation, then they will always develop language with certain properties. Examples: distinguishing nouns from verbs, syntactic structure, right? Some kind of syntactic and contextual structure. The theory proposes that there is an innate, genetically determined language faculty, as Noam Chomsky calls it, that knows these rules, making it possible for children to learn to speak. This language faculty, does not know the vocabulary of any particular language, so the words and their meanings must be learned. And there remain several parameters which can vary freely among languages, such as whether adjectives come before or after nouns, which also must be learned. Evidence in favor of this idea can be found in the studies of Valian, 1986, which show that children of surprisingly young ages understand syntactic categories and their distribution before this knowledge shows up in their production of it. So I'll read a quote from Chomsky. As Chomsky puts it, quote, evidently, development of language in the individual must involve three factors: genetic endowment, which sets limits on the attainable languages, thereby making language acquisition possible. Number two, external data, converted to the experience that selects one or another language within a narrow range. And three, principles not specific to the faculty of language. It's interesting. So
it is, yeah.
You're born already understanding distinguishing nouns from verbs. That's interesting. Or their syntactic. Maybe we do have some kind of syntactic structure, but I don't know.
But also I do think that's the differentiation of, like, if that's just saying you're born with the ability to differentiate yourself from an action or other selves, I think that's, yeah. I mean, we use the term noun and verb to represent.
Dolphins can do that.
Yeah, but we use these specific terms, but man, because that's, to me, I feel that's getting in the realm of, like, trying to understand consciousness, as opposed to just like the language of it, which is interesting. But I guess that's where Chomsky is going, though, right?
Not
Seemingly.
only so someone else, John Searle, who is both well acquainted with consciousness and
He's awesome. John Searle's
and
great.
Linguistics.
I've already requested to speak to him, by the way.
Really? Yeah, he's still alive. He's like 90-something.
Yep.
In fact, it might be a good idea for you to talk about the...
Are you taking a piss, Barry?
No. I'm filling up my cat's water bowl.
Okay.
I'm not that much of a savage.
I would have laughed if you were.
I did it accidentally one night.
Really? Yeah, let me just turn my camera on real quick. No.
Yeah, bro. See that shit.
But
John Searle, pics, buddy.
John Searle has the Chinese argument.
The Chinese room argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's for AI. That's for talking about, does the person in the room speak Chinese based on those parameters?
Based on if there's a little man in your head looking at all of these symbols that are in Chinese, and you're able to, yes, it is an AI argument, and you're able to interpret whatever based on those symbols, or you're able to output some, proportionate set of data, sensory data. And that's kind of where consciousness and language gets commingled with each other. That's what I was thinking of earlier, Scott. That's the first thing that came to me was consciousness. And it begs the question, like, what? Of course, obviously, what is consciousness? Perhaps that would be the first thing that we would go into.
Let's for the sake of discussion, let's just assume it. Let's just assume that consciousness is an attribute of conscious agents. How's that sound? Just for the sake of argument, we're not going to question consciousness tonight.
Yeah, it's universally agreed upon, Perry. So, like, we all agree to it, so we can
have conversation.
Yep.
Agree to what, though? I'm confused.
That consciousness exists and it's real and we have it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Thomas was just going against, like, well, how do you know that? And what's your standard, right? Like, Thomas is just arguing. It's like, hey, let's don't.
Yes.
No, God is my standard.
No, I mean, Perry's just the infinite skeptic, and I was just saying, for the sake of this argument, we can just assume prima facie that consciousness exists. Everybody's got it. We don't know what it is, but maybe it's material. And
I'm a wannabe Socrates. It's the easiest position where you just keep asking questions. You don't have anything actually like substantial to say. You just keep.
I think you have quite a bit. I think you have quite a bit
questions.
Substantial to say, because the questions are what are good. So this universal grammar thing, I'm not 100% sold on either. Yeah. But I lean towards the idea that we have genetic programming from, evolutionary biology, but maybe closer, obviously not closer towards the side of omniscience, closer towards the side of the blank slate. But there are criticisms of the universal language theory. There's like 8 paragraphs of it. Yeah. So if anybody wants to know the criticisms to universal grammar, just go to Wikipedia, type in universal grammar, go to the bottom, and read the criticisms. We could read some of them now, but it's up to you guys if you want me to do that.
I mean, if you're actually going to school to be like a linguist, how much time do you think you'd spend on universal? Right? It'd be like,
I don't know. I don't know if it's a thing that's
think about this thing. Yeah, like
I don't know if it's Scott, I don't know if it's something that they probably teach Chomsky's shit, and they probably do teach universal grammar. I just don't, obviously it's got so many criticisms. It's probably not something that's taught as like a scientific fact in academia,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, one of the criticisms is that universal grammar theories are not falsifiable, therefore pseudoscientific. That's Geoffrey Sampson. He argues that grammatical rules linguists posit are simply post hoc observations about existing languages rather than predictions about what is possible in a language.
Exactly.
Okay. It says, similarly, Jeffrey Ellman argues that the unlearnability of languages assumed by universal grammar is based on a too strict, worst-case model of grammar that is not in keeping with any actual grammar. James Herford argues that the postulate of a language acquisition device, an LAD, essentially amounts to the trivial claim that languages are learned by humans, and thus that the LAD is less a theory than an explanation looking for theories.
Yep.
So it's saying it's a trivial. So they're saying it's a trivial claim that we have language acquisition devices, that languages are learned by humans. That's true. They're learned by all humans. So yeah, that's kind of a cool little comeback there.
This thing, you're from the South, and you're quite aware of many people who have no notion of what is grammatically correct. There's no universal grammar of like this is just obviously fucking true.
Yeah, if you want to disprove Chomsky, just go down south.
Yeah.
I'm gonna raise my boy right. I'm gonna beat the hell out of him, and I'm gonna fucking teach him how to fuck a woman right.
I'm fixing to come over there and get it done.
Come on over here, big boy. Let's get it done.
What is it? What does that mean?
Shit,
Chomsky would somehow make some sort of syntactical structure amongst those phrases.
Yeah, well, he'd point out, because there's definitely verbs and nouns,
Right.
When you say boy, like that's a noun. There's verbs there, but to me, that's still just. I mean, that's something that I think even animals without language are aware of, right? Of themselves versus others and versus an action. Right?
Yeah, you don't need the idea of verbs to acknowledge existence and ontology. You could just say like, he ape, you monkey.
Yeah.
There was a Family Guy joke that was. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like that was
legend.
saying, yeah, him legend. You, me, sex. Him legend.
Him legend. That was funny. That actually made, I saw that like within the past 2 or 3 weeks, and I remember laughing to that. It was pretty funny.
Him legend. That's so stupid. I love it.
Is it bad to say that
Are we
I've
being
learned a lot?
tortured tonight or what?
Oh shit.
Are we being tortured?
Yeah. Well, now that you're here.
Awesome.
Now that you're here, oh, dude, Perry with the burns, nice.
Dun-dun-dun-dun.
What's up, Nivik?
Huh?
I thought you were saying something, Nivik.
Nivik.
Oh no, I just think that things can be translated. You see one act, and what comes of it, it's just translated, like what I was talking about, like a tell, like when I was using the Agassi example, or you see a person, they do certain things, they make certain gestures, and an act comes of it. In a way, you're reading what's in their head. You're reading their tells. They're communicating.
Talking about body language?
No, I'm just saying, like a certain gesture.
Yes, body.
You see a certain
yes,
act.
Liv.
Yeah.
Liv, you're talking about body language, buddy.
Well, I mean, you could a person could make a sound. I don't know. I'm just
that would be language. That would be spoken language.
You said they made a gesture, and that gave you an indication of what they were thinking. That's
Yeah, you can have any kind of gesture, like me smiling is a gesture that can give you a window into my emotions. Like, yeah, I mean they have.
No,
things
I'm just saying one
micro...
thing is followed with another thing. Is all I'm saying. So people something's being communicated. One thing one act that a person does, it relates to like a gesture, body language, and then it relates to them doing a certain thing. Then that would be that gesture, that sound, or that body language. It would relate to that act. You're translating what's in the person's head. Like if that.
Yeah. I mean, like that's still.
You don't
body
need
language
sound.
is still language,
yeah.
man.
Well, Nivik, you're not translating what's in their head. You're translating what your senses are taking in, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Well.
Yes.
No.
Niv, come on now. Don't tell us you know what somebody's actually thinking.
What am I thinking right now, Nivik?
Thinking about penis.
That is one thing. What else am I thinking about? Oh, okay, we stumped him.
Nivik, what's Thomas thinking of?
Nivik, are you gone?
He's probably in a dead zone right now.
Probably so.
He's thinking about Nivekia, the place where
Nivekia. Is that like
Utopia,
Narnia?
but it's like Utopia, but with a bunch of Niviks.
That's Nivik's homeland.
I started watching the new Witcher. They need a fucking place called Nivekia.
Nivekia.
Sounds like a planet. It could be a whole ass planet.
It's like you just get
I think of like
just,
the Nivekian unit as head of like a Wakanda like race. You know what I mean?
Right. And not because you're black.
Unit. No.
Huh?
He said, huh? I didn't know you were black.
No, Travis, what you're saying? Sorry about that. I dropped out.
Oh, was it, I think Scott was asking you what is Thomas thinking right now.
Well, I was just being a jackass and saying, "What am I thinking right now?"
No, like when I was using the example, like with when I was mentioning Agassi, the tennis player, they're saying, how come
You're
you
roboting
so
bad for me. I don't know about you guys.
you can't hear me?
I
I
can
can
hear
hear
you
you.
I
now.
can hear you.
Yeah.
That Agassi, the tennis player, they're saying like, how did you anticipate? Like, how did you react so quickly? And he said, the trouble wasn't really reacting. The trouble was pretending as if I never knew what was going to be done because I was reading the tells on my opponent. He said like Becker, for example, every time he's going to make a serve to the left, his tongue sticks out of his mouth and it goes to the left.
Yeah,
And every
our
time
body
he's
language. Yeah,
going to make a right, his tongue sticks out, it goes to the right. When it goes down the middle, his tongue sticks straight down the middle, and it drove him crazy. Well, how come he kept like? Why was he so good
but
in?
Nivek, behavior analysis might give us some clues about, you know, allow us to better predict what someone might do next. But it sounds like you're talking about like using that to like peer into their mind.
Well, I mean, if a person is going to do something and they're going to make a left turn, and you see them make every time their tongue sticks to the left 1,000 times, they make a left. I'm not saying it's still you'd be guessing, right? Maybe one time it might be it might be a right turn this time, but I mean
Yeah.
you're going to relate it possibly to that tell. I mean I'd go all in on that tell.
Sorry about that. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I think Nivik's talking a bit about behavioral psychology and analysis,
Okay.
and that there's these certain tells and predictions that you can make based on other people's behavior. Um,
Yeah. There's
I
things
think
called
that
micro expressions. There's body
yeah,
language. There's all kinds of, different
he is
linguistics.
getting, yeah, and I wonder where I could even take this because I want to relate it to like language and how we interpret language based on the signs that we see and the noises that we hear. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in a sense, we kind of are making an educated guess and prediction every time that we think we understand something.
Yep.
So, and I would go all in certain situations because some things just happen repetitively so accurately and so precisely over and over that it's just natural to be convinced that that is now a fact of reality. But there is that one time that the ground may just fall through.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. I'm
Fuck
gonna
it,
I'm
if it
gonna
does, I'll be
accept it as a
sick.
brute fact that when I take my next step, the ground will be there.
Right? Yeah.
Uh, um, the linguistics of universal grammar and Chomsky, like we were talking about, are still
Yeah.
controversial as hell.
Yeah.
Chicken and egg stuff, like you talked about, Perry. What else is a good summary? I mean, I'm trying to think of another good.
Well, to me, it just fucking screams ought from an is, right? This is the way things
Yeah.
are. So this is the way they ought to be. This is the way like it's supposed to be. And people have been doing this for fucking ever.
Oh, is it not?
Yeah.
Let's see here.
Well, where do
Trying to
you
find some.
derive aughts from then, Scott?
That's a good question.
Where do I derive oughts from?
Yeah, you.
Mostly from, I don't know, just my own personal fucking understanding of the world around me. That's basically all I have, in my opinion.
I don't understand what that ought from is about again. You can't. How does it go?
It it's about the fact value distinction in epistemology, Nivik, when you have a descriptive fact or a normative value. So an is there is a child in the street. Uh, the ought would be I ought to go help that child out of the street.
But also, it also goes down the line of like, it is the case we're in a democracy, so it ought to be the case that democracy is the best way to govern ourselves. Right.
There
Well,
are some people who think that, yeah.
so I would say every human being, uh, well, I mean, you know, let me bite my tongue there. It seems to me that when you get down to any ought, well, why ought we do that? Why? When you boil it down to its most fundamental basis, the at a certain point, the subject needs to throw his arms in the air and says, you know, because I want to, or because it feels good to do that.
Yep.
And
Fitness
that's
battle.
why you'll always see me in the comments section below when people are talking about ought and meaning and values, and people return to it. But why? For the pleasure of fucking doing so. That's all. Why do I think we ought not rape children for the pleasure of doing so? Why do I think we ought help feed the hungry for the pleasure of doing so? These are some things that can feel good, and then the next person might say, "Oh, that can feel good. I never really thought about it that way. Let me try that. I'm going to give food to that person. They needed it. You know what? That did feel good. You know, I'm going to tell my buddy about that." Like, I think for the pleasure of doing so. But then we can take that and abstract some
Altruism?
metrics, some metrics above that, like, you know, I use well-being as a moral metric. So if someone wants to ask me a more detailed answer as to, you know, instead of why well-being, well, because it feels good to maximize well-being, you know, we can go to the metric of well-being and why that matters with regards to anyone who would wish to serve any purposes. You know, the Christian will likely want to be alive instead of dead and healthy instead of sick, as well as the Muslim, the Hindu, the atheist. So I think like the ought dilemma, because everyone's going to have all these different oughts, we should look at, and I think Sam Harris did well in the moral landscape to look at this and say that, well, all things aside, all lore aside, all additional laws of how to be aside, we'll all want to be alive and healthy while doing this. You know, those of us of sound mind. So that's where the well-being calculus comes in. That should sit under Christianity, Hinduism.
See, I guess I'm applying that same principle to the term to the world of like linguistics, right? So you can point out that and say it's the case that we do have this specific syntax with the way we use words, but I don't think that's the way it ought to be. I just think that's the way it is, right? And we can deal with the way it is, right? But there's no specific ought. And I think Chomsky was trying to say that this is the way it ought to be because this is what we have. And that was, to me, that's my main criticism of Chomsky.
I think that you're completely right, and that's what the post-structuralist will say, is that we don't agree to conforming to these previous ideals created by faulty power, you know, political power and stuff should be, or if he was just describing the world and how he saw these certain experiments and negative evidence as he claimed it to be, that's how the world is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think with everybody, like everybody that we ever talk about, every thinker, you do have to sort of understand or attempt to understand, because we obviously can't, but where they're actually coming from, right? So like Chomsky is
that'd be so nice if we knew that.
yeah, like Chomsky comes from like uh he was born in what, like the 1930s or some shit like that. It's like, I mean,
he's an old feller.
Yeah, he's old.
It's entirely different.
And he's still doing talks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Got the willpower of the ancients.
but I agree with you that a lot of the language that we do use can promote some issue amongst certain individuals because they don't agree with how those things were based upon and how they originated. Religion would be a big one with this kind of stuff.
When also like just like religion and like attitudes as well, right? So now you'll see Gen Xers being like, oh, these fucking Gen Z kids, they just don't know what it was like when we were kids. And that's the same thing fucking baby boomers were saying to Gen X kids fucking 20 years ago, To me, I see like, that's what I see. I see the absurdity of this kind of thing. Right, and to try and I don't know, say you have some sort of answer to this, like, I don't know, soup of fucking soup that we live in. Basically, we're just like a constantly like swirling soup of fucking people, and like, I don't know. There's no solid answer to these things, and that's just sort of my opinion.
I like the way that you put that. We're all just like this matrix or soup, rather, of electricity and matter and whatever other immaterial or possibly material.
Well, we can even go one step further and tie it to today's conversation and say we are alphabets.
There you go. Yep. Well, yeah, I would. I just had another thought that I don't even know if I want to tangent off into this, which is consciousness and mind and concepts and ideas, are those tangible or are those abstract? I don't know if I want to tangent into that. I actually do want to ask you, Travis, a question. We were talking about ought and is, and you mentioned how there's an infinite regress of why. I don't know if why and should are the same questions.
Well, I didn't say infinite regress.
You can
right?
just continue to the most fundamental unit of asking why, I think is what you said. And you said it's for the pleasure of doing so. I guess my only question would be, and I'm not going to be on the popular side of things when I ask this. Obviously, everyone's going to head towards survival. But why should we do things for the pleasure of doing so? Or should we?
Oh no,
should
there's
yes or no? Should we?
Yeah, my best argument to that is, I think that's what we are. I think we are pleasure drives that build up these pleasure hierarchies and pursue them. And some people will call them value hierarchies, but I call them pleasure hierarchies because I think it ties better to what our biology is.
You say the word sentiments
actually doing. So, your sentiments, that takes into consideration
your attitudes, your affectations,
your wants.
Yeah,
your affectations, your wants.
It's an attitude.
Your emotions.
It's an attitude towards a situation or event. It's just an attitude, and an attitude is a nature and nurture, inherent, like intrinsic. It's where emotions are born from. Emotions and thoughts are born from attitudes in psychology.
So why should we do that, Travis? Why should we?
Yeah. So if someone says, why, if I say, okay, let's go through this dialectic. Okay, I say to you, all of this fundamentally is just we're doing all this stuff for the pleasure of doing so. And then you ask,
why? Or I guess I would ask,
or why should I live?
I would ask is, essentially, I would ask, are you presupposing that we should be doing things for the pleasure of doing so?
Yeah, so I've operated on two fundamental presuppositions: that life is preferential to death and health is preferential to sickness. Gotcha. Okay? Now, most people of sound mind tend to agree with me on that. I've of course spoken to people that aren't convinced yet. They're kind of agnostic to whether they know that life is preferential to death. Mm-hmm. But there's very few people that don't claim to know that health is preferential to sickness. But yeah, those two fundamental presuppositions drive me towards well-being as a moral metric, because I think you need well-being to clearly be able to identify and pursue your purposes. How can you identify your purposes, what you truly want to be doing when you're ill or while you're pursuing death? It becomes very difficult. So yeah, those two fundamental presuppositions that I think almost all of us operate with, that we're gonna choose to believe that life is preferential to death and that health is preferential to sickness, and move on from those from that position. So those would be the presuppositions. If someone asks me, well, why should I value life instead of death? My answer to that is, I say, it seems as though we have an infinite amount of time to be dead. Yeah. And I could be wrong about that, but it seems to be the case that we have an infinite amount of time to be dead and a very short amount of time to be alive. So I'm like, just give it a try. Try, even if you have to reset your life many times, just keep playing around and do what you want. And I would say, please go forth with this simple principle, that that maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you should be the bare minimum moral quest that you bring to the table. Now, that doesn't mean your circle needs to be so grand that you have to be out there doing, quote unquote, God's work all the time. But just those that you come into interaction with, please give your moral consideration to their well-being, because they are on a very similar quest that you are on.
Well, that's very easy to say rather than do, to try and reconcile moral subjectivity and the sentiments that are subjective to each individual, because there's the issue of sadism and masochism. I mean, perhaps they would still be they would still be pleasure-driven when they try to inflict or induce pain on themselves. I mean, if that still provides pleasure, how does that work in this?
Don't get too stuck on pleasure. We're talking about the moral quest here. Well-being as the moral metric. What does that mean? Right. A lot of people are like, well, someone could just come along and make up their own idea of what well-being is. Yeah, someone could do that, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what Sam Harris is talking about. That's not what Richard Dawkins, Matt Dillahunty. We're talking about the well-being in medical science, dealing with the functionality of body and mind. Now, I believe one day we will find a physical representation of concepts in the mind, so I think it's all body, but for the sake of the dualists out there, I'll say body and mind. So the well-being standard being the functionality of body and mind in the individual serving their purposes. For instance, if you go to the doctor and say, yeah, I got this, and the doctor's like, you have this vicious cancer, what do you want to do about it? And they say, well, my purpose is to die. The doctor's going to be like, oh, okay, well, you're on your way. Next. So they're on their way. Their purposes are going to be well served. But if your purpose is to be a professional hockey player, and you go into the doctor and they look at your body, the functionality of your body, and they say, oh shit, you have a hairline fracture in your femur. And then they check in with the mind. We do our best to interact with the mind through clinical psychology, the impossible task of trying to abstract accurately and truthfully from the subject. But in this case, the hockey players, of sound mind, the mind's good. We just got this hairline fracture to deal with. What is their purpose? I want to get back on the fucking ice. I got to work. My family needs to eat. My baby needs diapers, all this stuff. So, they're going to assist them with the wellness, the well-being of the functionality of their body, so that they can serve their purposes. So when I'm talking about well-being, I'm simply talking about functionality of body and mind in serving the individual's purposes.
Okay. And those purposes, you don't see an issue with people having differing purposes that will conflict in actions amongst each other, because people have to interact with each other, right?
Oh yeah, of course. What I would argue to them is what my moral quest is, right? So there's the well-being that I want to maximize well-being for themselves, for myself and those around me, and I would pass that on is a great base principle to satisfy those two fundamental presuppositions that we were talking about before, that life is preferential to death and health is preferential to sickness. Where better to sort out and make sure we achieve at least those fundamental presuppositions than at the hospital and in the doctor's office, where we have used things like science and logic to come up with methods of healing our bodies and minds and giving us the best chance, the best foot forward in to live healthy instead of be sick, and to live instead of die. So that's where the well-being calculus is born out of that. So I just try to pass that idea on to as many people as I can. I'm like, yes, keep your Christianity if it's not negatively affecting your well-being. Of course, to some people, I think I could make an argument that it is. You know, it turns them into a psychopath. Oh, Jesus is talking to me. I killed my daughter. Oh my God, I'm in prison.
Killed my 4 daughters.
You know,
drowned them in a bathtub because Jesus told me.
Yeah, exactly. That woman who killed how many daughters? But
3 or 4,
we've seen many situations. So in that situation, I'd be like, so this religious ideation drove her to not only affect negatively her own well-being, but the well-being of her kids, right? So those conversations continue. But I would say the thing that we would reference to see whether this religious belief is good or not would be the well-being calculus. That's what I use. I say, well, what's it doing for the functionality of your body and mind? And then someone's like, well, it makes me feel good in my mind and keeps it doesn't make me unhealthy in my body. Great. That's awesome. From a well-being perspective, you're good. Now, if someone says, I got this idea, man. The government, they're in my mind. They're listening to me, man. What can I do? Kind of some Charlie Manson stuff. You know, it seems as though, again, from a clinical psychological perspective, that from a functionality perspective, that we might have some mind issues here that are harming the well-being of the individual.
Yeah, that's the issue, is because, I mean, we know the body functionality pretty well, extremely well, comparatively speaking, to the mind functionality, which we have a lot lesser tier theories posed to them, which we're doing our best in the field of science and in hospitals. I mean, I completely agree with you with the setting of this type of this thought.
You're so right, Perry, because it's very easy to scan and identify a tumor and then try to remove it. But what isn't easy is to ask a question and try to identify the trauma tumor, and then go in through these very loose, strange approaches to try and access it in the mind and try to make the subject feel better about it or move on from it, or, you know, like all these things, that the impossible task that clinical psychology is tasked with to approach the mind. What I dream of is one day, and what I think medicine will look like one day, is you won't only go in for brain surgery to remove a tumor, you will go in for brain surgery to remove or affect a concept in your mind, an individual concept or experience.
Yeah, that's obviously seems more sci-fi than realistic, where we're at today.
It's an interesting concept, though.
It'd be, if anything, if we're actually going to be practical about it in science fictional ways, it'd be like kind of perhaps just changing the shape of your brain in a certain way that will allow or hinder certain ideas and concepts that, you know, are heavily influenced when we change this shape of the brain, yada, yada, yada. I mean, perhaps I think that's what it is. I mean, I think the brain is a physical piece of matter that takes up space and time and is in a certain pattern and shape and position that it, you know, alongside with electricity, I guess, and hormones. I know nothing of neurochemistry, okay? So don't quote me on anything. But,
It's okay.
I mean, what if we just live in a world that is dualistic and somehow we have spirits that are roaming about somehow independently of,
That's possible,
of our matter?
but do we have any indication
it's
as to
unfalsifiable, of course.
that being the case?
No, I guess where I would make a more fair question is I guess what I was saying I didn't want to talk about earlier, whether thought is material or immaterial, if it's the byproduct of something material, if that byproduct
I
is
would
material,
say almost certainly
whatever.
material.
I think that would
I mean,
be
we've never had an example of something that's not physical, right?
yeah, just 'cause it
You would
just
think
becomes
so. I
physical
mean,
once we
look,
have
I'm
that
not
representation.
claiming to know that it's all physics and physical, but I think we created metaphysics because the mind just seemed like such a hard problem, worthy and concepts worthy of their own category, like physics. But I think it's all physics, man. Even if we haven't detected it all yet.
Yeah, I
And,
mean the
yeah,
mind
for
could.
Thomas.
Oh, you're good, buddy. The mind could be material. I look at it as like, I mean, very loosely, analogously, like a brain hardware has the firmware program modules, and then you look at the mind as operating system software, and that could be material.
Yeah, the
in
hard
some
problem
way.
deals with this. Is
So-
like, where can we find the material representation of experience? Where does experience lay? Where do concepts? Where are the concepts recorded? Because if you imagine, like Perry, imagine the love that you have for your mother. That exists conceptually, but we still don't know where it is physically, like the actual concept itself. Because if it exists and you've experienced it and you can
Yeah.
recall it, and where the fuck is it? That's the hard problem of consciousness, right there. Where the fuck is it?
It's
That's,
in the pineal.
well, people
the
say that,
pineal
yeah,
gland.
in the
Isn't
pineal
that what,
gland, and then you open it up
what
with
Descartes
yoga
tried
and
to say or
stuff.
something?
But right.
That was Descartes' argument.
And I'm not saying
is
it's
that,
necessarily wrong. I'm just like I'm just saying, like, let's build a a particle accelerator the size of the moon and shove my head in it and see see where you can
Yes.
see any concepts. Just don't, if you see all the creepy ones in my mind, just don't expose me, man.
We can't. The hard problem of consciousness is exactly as you described it. That was perfect. But it is also more generally, how do you have non-conscious matter
Right.
and get consciousness from non-conscious matter? So, if if you're looking at the mind,
Intuitively,
the conceptual is real just as much as the external world is real.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's like the operating system in my computer is not real. It's not tangible. But it's not. We can perceive it by looking at what it does, but it's still within the realm of physicality. Does that make sense? It's still within physicalism.
Look, and I would be the first one to say, like, if we find something that's non-physical, like not just apart from us, like, hypothesizing and saying, like, oh, mind body dualism. I mean, like, if we actually find something that's non-physical, now How we're going to detect such a thing, that's up to smarter people. But how would you detect something that's non-physical? Any ideas? Meditation,
Well,
like
I mean,
thinking,
definitionally,
If we could somehow measure it, it would just
Exactly.
become physical.
yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. It would have to be a priori through our thinking and our consciousness if we were to potentially get to some non-physical substance, which seems like a oxymoronic term and very contradictory because, like Thomas just
Well,
said,
it would be
seems as
idealist then. It would be idealistic or neutral.
I mean, either way, it is not. It doesn't make any sense whether we're just non-living matter somehow formed in a way where we're now living, or if there's some immaterial soul corresponding our movements somehow outside of space and time. I mean,
we could definitely pontificate and artistically draw up many, gods and different answers to this, like we have throughout our history. But I was kind of thinking, like, okay, if we were to sit down in the lab right now, it's like, let's build an apparatus that's going to help us detect the non-physical. That's kind of like what those ghost hunters do on TV, They like bring their little EV, but maybe they would say that, no, these are physical detections. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right,
It's
exactly. That's the perfect.
It's hard to escape it, man. I don't know how you escape the physical.
I don't either. Unless you are Donald Hoffman, to where you go backwards and instead of assuming that matter exists and then you try to draw consciousness from that, he's saying prima facie consciousness exists. How do we draw physical matter from consciousness?
It's a good argument.
Man is a brilliant polymath. We have a caller. Let's see what we got here. What's up? Hello? Hello to you.
It'd be really funny if he answered with that exact same accent. And it was
yes. Hello to you. Trying to do like this Swedish, Finnish.
That's
I don't
Borat.
know. Hello, how are you doing, Travis? Well, that is Borat. That is Borat, isn't it? Shit. I don't know. I guess I don't know how to do.
I'm just playing. I think you did good Swedish.
You guys keep going. I was loving listening to that.
I think John Lennon says it the best. I am, he is, you are, he is, you are me, and we are all together. I love that line.
Yeah, that is good.
I thought you were going to quote John Lennon and say,
the universe.
Women are the nigger of the world. You haven't heard that song?
No, I don't even know if there's an alternate universe where I would have said that.
But he's got it. So this is how much things have changed, man. Like him and Yoko Ono were playing that on like what's equivalent to like going on late night television now. What's one of these late night television guys now? Now,
are you talking about now, or are you talking about back in the day?
Yeah, like
Johnny?
it would be like going
Stephen
on Colbert and
performing
that
Jimmy
song.
Fallon or something.
Because I think he did it on I forget,
so
but
funny.
you guys can Google it. It's on YouTube actually. YouTube allows it. But yeah, it's an interesting song.
I mean, what was his intent for doing that? Was he like? I mean, I don't know really anything with him and Yoko, but what I do know is that like Yoko had some sort of, she was like manipulating him or something.
No, I don't think so. I think there were a couple of the band members that weren't happy about her presence all the time, but some sort of drama.
For
the most part, they thought that like I think that's more of lore that's around about like Yoko Ono broke up the band, but it wasn't about that.
Yeah.
But what was the intent of the song?
Well,
what
look at the
I don't know
lyrics.
if I asked
It's
that or
a
not, but
like
I'm
it's a
fried.
song about how like women, essentially that women are the slaves of the world, and they obviously use the provocative language that they used in the song. But I actually think it's a
Gotcha.
pretty good song. Like it's kind of cool. It's of course very edgy, but I think it's a good rock and roll song. I'm not gonna sing it. I'm not gonna sing it because it would just make too good of a soundbite. I think.
Yeah.
But.
Go to karaoke night and be like, hey, you got this track?
I'll make sure I do it right in the south side of Chicago.
Dude, but I think it goes more to the point that like John Lennon was a really fucking weird dude, right?
No
Yoko
question.
Ono was a really weird lady, and they fucking got along, and their weirdness was great together, right? Like they were like, they loved each other crazily, right? But
yeah, there were a couple
weird.
of weird hippies
That's all good.
that loved each other, and they were fucking into the weird hippie shit, you know?
Yep.
Was it like pre or post LSD phase of Beatles?
Oh, way post.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she hated the rest of the other.
Oh,
band
I
members,
disagree with
sure.
that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she
so?
she loves. I think she loved them all. I honestly think, man, like I think she gets a pretty bad rap. I think she's probably the worst person to ever pick up any instrument. Of course, like as far as like her talent.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah.
Including the
voice. Have you heard Chuck Berry talk about when John Lennon went on stage to play Johnny Be Good with him, and Yoko Ono came on stage too, but Chuck Berry didn't know she would be on there, but she got onto some mic and started like doing her howling thing. And he was like, he was explaining it. He's like, and then some bitch gets on the stage behind me.
Yeah. Dude, that's the thing. Like Yoko Ono was like hardcore into like crazy experimental shit. Like she was like truly into like music concrete and all this kind of shit. Which is like if you don't know what that is, like it's
John Lennon's
dude.
like last stuff that he was working on was it was just macabre, very wild out there, like not even like trippy psychedelic, no, just like kind of like ideologically jarring, like almost like music of the absurd he was getting into.
Well, it was the whole point was breaking the bounds.
Someone's gonna tell John Lennon he can't do a song on something. I'm gonna do a song on that thing.
Well, they're even trying to get away. Like if you look into it, of like melodies and harmonies, right? They were like trying to like dismantle.
You know who else
music.
was trying to do that? Charlie Manson. Well, have you heard his songs? Like, dude, listen to Charlie Manson's songs. They're fucking. They're wild. They're like a. I don't know what I imagine like being on LSD would be like, you know? I've never done LSD, but kind of like listening to his songs
pretty awesome.
Kind of make me think like, okay, when people describe this to me, that's kind of what it seems like. But I've never done anything but smoke a bit of grass, man.
Dude, well, the perfect LSD song is like my hands feel like they are larger than they actually are. What's going on here now?
You got to try a couple grams of shrooms.
Yeah, people tell me that, man. But the way my mind is, I don't know if I'd ever come out of it. I don't know.
No, you'd be fine, dude.
I mean,
Shrooms
honestly,
I know my doctor
Shrooms
said never,
benign.
ever do any kind of thing like that. I don't know his reasoning, but
yeah, I don't know. If you have that mentality that you will be in it, as you said, forever, then I don't know.
Dude,
I don't think I wouldn't advise it.
You can do this though, Travis. Stay up for 5 days straight,
and then I'll have the feeling,
and you'll. Oh no, you
Right,
actually
right.
do trip. Your body starts producing more serotonin.
Ooh,
Like I actually tripped when I was in basic
Shit.
training because of sleep deprivation.
yeah, but that's probably a shitty trip.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
terrible because I had
so,
a drill sergeant yelling at me at the front of the room.
psilocybin hallucinogenics won't like change you for life. LSD might, but because
Right.
it breaks the blood-brain barrier. But don't, and they're probably safer than marijuana. I mean, you can't overdose. You could do
I
like
mean,
a pound,
I
and
mean,
it's not
For
going to
like the
kill
I
you.
same
still
Just
think
price.
that alcohol is probably
and
the
it's
most dangerous drug
legal in
I've ever tried. You know,
Oh yeah,
I,
I
don't drink.
agree. I agree.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I don't drink
I don't know.
alcohol.
I'd say fentanyl is sort of like
Okay,
equal.
well, yeah, obviously.
yeah,
Well,
I agree with Scott. I'll take a nice craft beer over a dose of fentanyl.
Yeah, over some crocodile or whatever that
I've
shit's
never
called.
had fentanyl, but I've had things pretty strong.
Thomas,
So
I gotta know this. What is the craziest high you've ever had, and what was it like? If I can derail this for a moment.
the craziest high,
Yeah.
probably an acid trip. I mean, I did DMT, the ingesting kind. I don't know if it was peyote or ayahuasca. I don't know enough, but I did it with a friend, and that was pretty transcendental. But I've had some crazy experiences on acid. So in terms of hallucinogenics, that's DMT is probably the. It's hard to describe what happened. It's the same thing with like an acid trip. You can kind of describe it, but you
Right.
don't remember all of what you were thinking. Uh, in terms of like as fucked up as I've
Sure.
ever been, is that kind of more what you're asking? I've taken what's called opanas, which is oxymorphone. That's pretty close to something like fentanyl. It's nowhere near as strong. It's not as strong proportionately for how much there is. But a 60 milligram pill of that is, and this was probably like 8 or 9 years ago. You can shave off a fifth of that pill, and I was in the floor for like 2 hours, just destroyed, couldn't move anything.
A
But
fifth of it? Is that what you
Were
said?
you
yeah,
so
a
were
fifth
you
of a 60
scared?
milligram pill.
Well, this is the difference between uppers and
No, I
downers,
wasn't.
So
I
guys.
wasn't scared.
help me to understand this, because if I found this
Travis is
if
so
I found
worried.
myself in this
You're so worried.
state,
Yeah.
do you have any like death anxiety, like, oh fuck, this is it, I'm gonna die, or is it just like
Yeah.
I, no, I think
Yeah.
about death constantly.
Yeah.
No, I mean like I no when I'm that fucked up, I know my limitations. I know how far I can go, and I know how fucked up I can get before it gets dangerous. I've never gotten to the point where I felt like I was going to die on any drug. Well, I may have thought I wanted to die on acid a couple of
Yeah.
times, but
That's my exact point I was going to go to, Thomas. That's the differentiation between like uppers and downers. On downers, you're not
yes.
thinking about fucking shit.
No,
You're
oxymorphone is just a stronger version of like a morphine drip or like
yeah.
methadone or something like that. Um, it just floors you when you're really high on an opiate, especially a synthetic opiate. It just feels like goddamn heaven. Your whole body just feels amazing, and like if you're so fucked up you can't move on opiates, you just lay down and you just drift to sleep, and it's one of the best feelings of all time. But that's probably the most destroyed I've ever been. Is did a fifth of that pill and laid in the floor for 2 hours just
I
floating.
I do want to say something to Travis, that what you're describing, Travis, is the bad trip. Now, I've had the bad trip, and I don't know if it's correlated or not, but pretty much most times that I've done it in the wintertime up in Michigan, I would have a bad trip. When I did have a bad trip, I'm like, okay, oh fuck, like I'm in the mix, like I gotta just exist, I just gotta be, while feeling like shit and whatever. Every time that I've had a bad trip, I've always peaked equally in the other direction during the same trip, like toward the end as you're coming down. And it's an incredible experience. I mean, all of my experiences have been a bit different. obviously with some similarities, but
Yep.
still pretty distinguished and unique. And
Yeah.
it really depends on what's going on in your life is another big one. I mean, whatever. Yeah.
It's still dependent on what type of drug you're doing, though, right?
Sure.
So like an upper like cocaine,
Adderall, methamphetamine, cocaine,
these
those
are
are
the kind of
uppers.
things that are going to make you think more, right? But when you take like a downer, like you don't think. Like
Yeah,
that's
I'm
the reason why
referring.
people.
I don't.
drink is
I
because
think
they
I
don't
have
wanna
the
fucking think
opposite.
about
I
fucking
think I have a
this, that, and
body
the
that
other.
would
I'm
never, ever,
referring to
ever
shrooms
need
and
an
acid
upper.
with my experiences.
I don't think I could. I don't think I could handle that.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say, Travis, don't ever
Look.
ever do a fucking downer. Because I think you'd probably be like, oh, this is nice.
It's amazing.
I mean,
Weed
well,
is
what's weed? What's weed then?
like weed has
Weed's
such
a
a
downer.
strong effect on me,
Yeah,
man.
so,
Like
but
literally
doesn't
when
Well,
weed
I
make you think more?
sativa, sativa's an
I have
upper.
to
It
smoke
makes
the,
you
the
think more.
weakest weed I can find. Like literally like 20% THC or whatever, like or 18% THC. And I like put a little bit in a bowl and I like take a bit of it and I feel like that's almost too much. Like my body's very sensitive to it. Well, I feel like if I do like an
I mean, what
actual
do you
bowl,
smoke?
like if I
Once,
take
Yeah,
a
once
but
every
big
10 days or something,
hoot,
once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, but
that
even
stays with me for like a few days. Like I'm not kidding. Like
yeah. But I do want to say though, Thomas, so like sativas are even technically depressants, right? So they don't they don't slow down your like autonomic nervous system, I think, as where uppers like speed it up, which is the
So,
difference.
yeah, sativa would probably still be considered a downer just because
Yeah.
of the cannabinoid reactions,
But
but
it's just the way that you classified it, Scott, saying that the downers make you think more, or you said something along the lines of that.
the
Oh,
uppers are
yeah.
things like amphetamines, and they do make you think
Oh, the uppers.
faster, but not
Okay.
better.
Yeah. It's definitely not more clear. Yeah. I mean, think about it this way. It's like, have you ever been like anxious, right? So like uppers are a thing that'll make you feel anxious. Downers
Yeah,
are
I
the
can't
thing that'll
do
make you
I can't
feel.
do uppers because exactly what Scott's saying. Like it makes me manic. It throws me into mania. So no uppers for me.
Do one rail of fucking blow, and you're gonna be like, dude, I've got the best ideas that you have to fucking kill, but I've got to say, dude,
Yes.
it's so good, dude.
It is so like that. When you're on coke, you're just like, man, my ideas are fucking great, dude.
I had a sleep deprivation psychosis after the birth of my first baby.
Damn.
Started
You
with
had
a mania for a couple of weeks, and then I broke and was
Mhm.
hallucinating, conferring with Satan and Jesus. So
Damn.
highs and lows. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, dude,
Oh,
sleep
psychosis is
deprivation.
so hard to explain to people, man. Like, they're like, well, when you say you were in manic psychosis, what does that mean? I'm like, it's so hard to explain.
Yeah,
It's like tripping. It really is like a
it
hallucinogenic,
was.
but it's
It
not
absolutely
comfortable.
was.
It's not
No,
comfortable.
and I ended up in a mental hospital for 6 weeks, and
Yeah, I had to go too.
they forced me to be medicated. They made me go before a judge and take all their drugs for a year. I wrote a book about it. I just put it in the chat if anybody's interested.
Oh,
Because
okay.
how I healed was using nutrition. I learned that you can nourish your brain, and once I realized that, I was kind of off to the races and just used nutrition and herbs, vitamins. Essential oils are powerful because they go beyond the blood-brain barrier, and that's where I had just some significant healing. But it's all a wild trip. I'm enjoying your war stories. Let's say that.
When you say beyond the blood-brain barrier, what do you mean?
Well, when you take a drug like Prozac, it has a tendency to lodge in your brain, and it's this goo that gives you a chemical lobotomy.
Oh.
And it's like a physical presence. It's mostly fluoride. And so it lodges, and it's very hard to get it gone. And they call that going beyond the blood-brain barrier. It's just stuck in there. And the essential oils, especially lavender, just kind of wend their way into that space and break up the plaque and help your body get it out. And I literally felt this happening to my brain as I cleaned out all of that goo. And I wasn't on the drugs for very long, but it really helped my memory and just clarity of thinking and ability to do everything once I got it all out of there. But some of those drugs, and they had me on a cocktail of like 4 different meds. They really turn you into a Stepford wife. Just no highs and lows. You're just flatlined all the time. And I hated it. And I wanted to have more kids. And they had me on lithium. And you can't take lithium when you're pregnant. So I wanted to get off of them. And I found a psychiatrist who was willing to help me wean. Because when you come off psychiatric meds, you have to do it so slow. And she helped me get off every single drug. And then I was able to move on with my life. But man, those essential oils are powerful.
I don't know if I could function without my medication, but I understand your want to get off them because they do come with side effects that I don't like. I completely feel you. So
yeah, well, just not being able to have any more kids was like my main motivator. I wanted to have a family. We ended up having 5 kids, and I didn't have another psychosis, even though statistically I could have had the recurrence rate is like 1 out of 6 if you've already had one. And then it's like 1 out of 1,000 women have this after the birth of a baby. And
wow.
it's directly tied to sleep deprivation. I know that was a huge factor. Who was it who's in the military? I didn't catch who was talking when you said that.
That was me, Ginny.
Oh, yeah.
Was that Scott?
Yeah, I was in the Army, yep.
Yeah, so and doctors and pilots, they all go through this when they have sleep deprivation. They can start hallucinating.
Oh, dude, pilots, it's rough. Yeah, I mean, there have been stories of pilots who have attacked their own guys because they were out of their wits. They'd been ups for so long. They're on uppers, and yeah, they shot at the wrong people.
Yeah, no, and people in the military, I think, are susceptible, especially when they're being medicated with uppers to keep them going. You have to sleep, and you have to get good sleep. It has to be REM sleep. So that's what we really zeroed in with after I had the next 4 kids, is those months after the birth when I had a newborn, I just, pushed everything away so that I could get sleep. It was the most important thing.
Yep.
Yeah, you go nuts without sleep.
You do.
I do.
Did
it's crazy.
you guys click over to the breastfeeding video I put in there when you were talking about mama's milk and language?
Oh, what is? Yeah.
I don't know.
It's really cool. It's a crawl. Some babies do it. Just like they're any other mammal, you see a baby deer be born, it stands up and goes over and starts nursing on its mom immediately. Yeah. It's very similar, natural, instinctual thing that it quite often will happen in a home birth where the mom just is aware and allows it to happen. But it's happened at hospital births too. And the baby will start out low on the mom's belly, and then it will crawl right up to the breast and latch itself on in a very instinctual way. So that's when I clicked in earlier. You guys were talking about that. I was like, I love the Pangburn hangout.
Yeah, we were using it as an example for trying to understand some linguistic topics. But yeah, it is instinctual, and it's interesting because a baby doesn't have that young of a baby doesn't have object permanence. So, it doesn't know if the teat's going to be there or not the next time it goes, but it has this instinct to do
yeah,
it.
And they've connected it to scent too. That the mother's breast smells very much like amniotic fluid, and they just know to head for it. So it's a fascinating thing that's been videotaped many, many times. If you Google that, I think it's, what's the term? The breastfeeding crawl or something. I can't even remember what I said. There's tons of videos. Yeah, the breast crawl. There's tons of videos of this, and it's just fascinating to watch.
Will they latch on to other females or other lactating females?
I don't know. I don't know of any study showing that, but there is the phenomenon of the wet nurse who used to be a job. These women would hire out to breastfeed the babies of noblemen, and the moms didn't want to nurse their babies, so they'd bring in some other woman, and the baby would have to, or it would starve. So I don't know that I've ever heard of any baby doing a breast crawl for a woman not their mother, though.
Yeah, that's the thing I was kind of getting at. I didn't know if they would latch on to to someone else, you know, especially within the days of birth. So
Well, and I can tell you guys, tying into the mental illness story, the argument I had for the judge about why I couldn't be medicated was I was breastfeeding. I said, I don't want to go on all these drugs and have to wean my baby. And he didn't care. They just put me on all these meds. And that's why I was so determined to get off of them, because I wanted to raise my kids holistically. And that's the foundation of all of their good health, is nursing them for a couple of years. So I was highly motivated to look for alternatives.
Yeah,
And
well,
so I was
I
really
get it.
glad that I found them.
a judge is not a doctor by any stretch of the imagination. That should not be a decision a judge is making.
Yeah, it should be psychiatrists.
I was 21 years old when this happened. I was really young. And because of the way it went down, and I felt like they messed with my body and my mind, it honestly turned me into an activist. It's why I feel so passionate about freedom. You know?
I agree with you. I agree with you on a lot of stuff, but you do realize mental health has come a shitload of a long way in the last 20 years. A long way.
No, I don't acknowledge that, Thomas, and it's because of the research I've done by people like Peter Bregan. His books have been kind of a mainstay, and I really feel like there's been about as much, messing with people in terms of the facts of, the side effects are not worth the supposed cure, especially for kids. If you have kids who have ADHD and other childhood psychiatric disorders, and they could be cured with good nutrition and other means, I think they should. But it feels like so many people are just willing to just put them on all these crazy meds without really thinking about the long-term consequences. And so I question everything in regards to mental health. I'm not questioning you.
No, I understand that. But I kind of agree a little bit, because I was put on Adderall as a kid from 9 or 10 until I was 17, right? And I don't doubt that probably added comorbidities to my bipolar. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug to meth. There is a pipeline.
Well, it's only a little bit. It's only a little bit of a difference from meth. They're both amphetamine salts.
That's my point. And the way the kids abuse them and buy them from their friends and snort it, there's just a lot of abuse of that drug and all of the drugs for ADD. And my feeling is, if you can do it another way with good nutrition or whatever, do it first. Because it's just been too casual, in my opinion. They're doing electroshock therapy right now on toddlers. And that is a next level of crazy, in my opinion.
Well, what if those toddlers deserve it, though?
Oh my God!
I'm totally just making a joke.
There is this hilarious blogger named Umi, and she's from Africa, and she does a blog called Honest Toddler. And it is one of the funniest blogs you'll ever read. She wrote a book. I mean, she got this huge following in the day, and some funny stuff. Toddlers if you behaved like a toddler as an adult, they would call you mentally ill and psychotic, because that's their go-to position.
Mm-hmm.
So you can understand why the parents would want some symptom relief around all of that, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to question what any parent chooses to do. I just wish it wasn't so drug centric in our culture, because it just feels like that's the easy choice,
Better living through chemistry, though, right?
Yeah, that's the mantra.
But there's the problem is there's truth to it, right? and of course it's like any thing that we start to go down the roads of trying to understand, we're going to make missteps. And this notion where we're at right now with trying to understand the way drugs work and the way they interact with the human body, like, we don't even know. Like, there are so many things that are related to, like, oh well, sometimes people with this specific gene have a really bad effect to it, but in the grand scheme of things, we're doing more good than bad, right? And that is the fundamental thing. And I know any person at the specific time that's happening is going to be like, well, that's not good enough because I'm the one that the bad is happening to, and I fucking get that. But at the same time, I don't think it matters in the long-term scale of human beings, right? Because in 1,000 years, all these things that we're going through right now, we'll have drugs that are specifically designed like, okay, well, let's take your DNA. We see, okay, here's this and this. Here's this exact thing that you need to make whatever's going on fucking done, fixed, right? And we will get to that point. And I would much rather be in the position of like working towards that point of being like, okay, there might be some bad side effects now, but let's keep moving towards that future goal, as opposed to saying there's bad side effects now, so we got to abandon the whole project.
Well, I'll tell you, Scott, the next level of psychiatric meds is here. And it's coming in the form of Neuralink, where they will place a chip in your brain and they will dose you as they feel like you need it, remotely. Oh, acting a little too crazy. We'll get you something to flatline that emotion too much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that kind of level of coercion and
yeah.
compulsion scares me,
Yeah,
frightens me.
but I'll say Neuralink is an Elon Musk thing. I think that has as much of a chance of succeeding as his boring company does.
No, I'm telling you, they have already been
I
doing
know,
trials on these chips.
I know,
They're a
yeah.
thing.
Yep, I know, but they also did trials of like boring tunnels in Los Angeles, but then when it proves to not work or like just be completely unviable, it just gets abandoned, right? And that's sort of the progress of the way things work in humanity, just work in life. Like some people try some things, if it works, it gets passed along. Like right, like so we have things that we know work. Air conditioning. We know this. We know the basic
Thank God.
fundamentals of this thing, that air conditioning works. So we still have air conditioning. Boring company, he was trying to make like fucking tunnels underneath cities. It's like, dude, we already have this. It's called subways. I don't know why you're trying to fucking reinvent the wheel here. But Elon Musk like throws a bunch of shit against the wall. A lot of
He
it
wanted
doesn't
it all
stick.
over the United States and like
Yeah,
transit systems for cars, and
yeah, yeah,
he wanted basically a, a nationwide
yeah.
subway, or
Yes,
you know what
yeah.
I mean. So
But I don't know, Ginny. I don't know if you saw when Elon Musk demonstrated his fucking robot, right? So he'd been talking all this time about a robot that's going to look exactly like a human, and he made this big press conference about like show off his robot, and they actually had to like, have like 5 dudes carry this thing on stage to like just fucking stand there. I mean, like the absurdity of the whole fucking production was just amazing. Because I mean, that's what happens. It's the same thing with like all the same kind of like scientific predictions people had in the 1950s of flying cars and the fucking Jetsons and all this kind of stuff.
Well, I'll
hey,
tell you, I
real
think I
quick,
could.
guys, I'm sorry. Brett hadn't talked in forever. He's got a
Oh,
real quick point to interject. I'm sorry,
oh,
Jenny.
Brett, go
No
ahead, brother.
worries.
Hey guys, I was just curious as you were talking about medications in school and whatnot, if you guys, if you thought this was at all related to like, I don't want to say the climb in industrial education in the 20th century, but like, I don't know, when I see a lot of these, medications being induced to kids, it seems like part of it is just, hey, like you got to go with the industrial model of work. And so if the kid can't sit still, or if they, because every human knows how to learn to some degree, but if they don't know how to learn by standardized tests and whatever else, and they learn by visual, audio, or whatever else, they might be medicated just so that they, can actually sit still in the given classroom. And I, for one, like, part of me likes that just because, I need to like be able to run a classroom efficiently, but it's also not the most optimal situation for people to learn. You know what I mean? Like, I think the medicated part is just, it's a cover until we actually figure out how to have every single human learn, regardless of, how they come to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too many times.
Adderall is a bit of a way to force, non-academic learners into the academic framework. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah,
Brett?
yeah, and it's also like how, we essentially are presenting education still in a, linear, monotone, like, again, industrial model of, get ready for the conveyor belt worker type of situation with standardized tests and other stuff like that. And while you do need to have a test for someone to become like a doctor, like it would be insane for, medical schools to get rid of that kind of stuff, that kind of thing. There also is this just like, I think as adults, people freak out because they're like, what is my child going to do? Like, what job are they going to have? How are they going to have financial security when they're older? And all these, relevant questions. But it also doesn't, like help when you have someone who gets to be like 17, 18 years old, and they're clearly not, like, unless a miracle turns around, they're not going to be like a lawyer, a doctor, they might be able to go work on the stock exchange or something like that. But like the way that they've been forced to convert again to the industrial model is they're going after what they're told to, and not what, actually might interest them.
Go ahead.
But I don't see how standardized tests relates to like what interests somebody, right? So you could still teach, and you're still going to have some sort of standard, right? So even if you're no matter what you do, there would be some sort of standard. Like, say, like, your job is to pick up dog shit. Like, right, there's a bad way to pick up dog shit, I promise you. Like, there would be people who just not be picking up dog shit the right way, and you'd have to be like, look, you're not picking up dog shit the right way. There's still all this dog shit everywhere, right? So you'd have to have some sort of standard there of saying this is how things need to be done, whether it's like industrial or not. Like, I think that existed pre-industrial, So I don't think the standardization is necessarily the problem. I do agree with you about this notion of pushing specific subjects, as opposed to and also not just subjects, but also a specific style of learning, as opposed to like finding what works for a child and like, okay, let's work within that framework. But then that also comes into play as like, okay, well, then we have to like break up children based on how they learn, as opposed to like just in like first grade, second grade, third grade. So now we're adding more teachers. I'm 100% for this. Try to convince the American populace that we need to tax them more so we can have better fucking education system. Good fucking luck on that one, man.
No, and Brett, one of the things I was going to finish off with, because I got to run soon, is I think I could have lived a really happy life these last 35 years with one child and being medicated and just, settling in as someone who was, quote, mentally ill. I guess you could say I still am because I was diagnosed. But I didn't want to live that life. I wanted to live free. And I felt like it was a punishment because it had come down to me from a judge, somebody who was a superior to me, backed up with courts and police with guns. And I didn't have any power back then. I was so young. But as I have grabbed my power and my autonomy and made decisions, believe me, it's my parents and my siblings who have been the most troubled by my choices. Oh, my sister Jenny is crazy and she refuses to take her meds, and that's why X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, I'm fine. I'm functioning. I'm not a danger to myself or other people.
Yeah,
I just choose
one of the problems
to go
you
down
run
this different
into,
path.
just
what I
quite
would like
frankly,
to see going forward is that option.
The way I'm talking about is the classroom doesn't know how to accommodate for 30 different
parents with minor
learning
children
styles.
and individuals who are saying, I want to try something else, are
by
supported
bringing everybody
in
into the
going down that
fold,
alternative
there
path.
are, like Scott
Whether it's
said, some
being
requirements that
unmedicated
do
or,
have to come
like
like
you
through
said,
social
using
behavior.
different sorts of
And
teaching
unfortunately,
methods or
people that
curriculums or
aren't able to meet
situations for
those minimum
children who don't
requirements,
fit with
you
that
know,
industrial
like
model. That's
we
one of the
don't really
reasons we
have a
chose
lot
to
of
homeschool
options
now
right
and then.
now
We just had
because
a kid.
people don't
It
want
was
to
a
put them
good
in
time for
smaller
them to
classes
spend
because they
some
don't
time
want
with
them to
mom.
feel ostracized.
And so I'd have a
But
kid
then
home for a
their
couple years
general
and then they'd go
behavior
back.
is
But,
at
that
times
flexibility
disruptive
and
to
that free
the,
choice
the
is what
given
I'm
learning
all about.
environment.
And my constant message,
So I
as I
guess I
share
am
my
sympathetic
books
to
and
a person's
podcasts, is
struggle
that
in that
we have
regard,
to have the
especially as a
freedom,
parent when you see, you're
to
wanting your
choose
kid to
one or
get the
the
best
other, and
education.
not have some
It's
heavy-handed
just rather difficult
situation
because,
backed up by big
like,
pharma
I've had
calling
kids
the
before
shots.
who
That's
were
where I really
unmedicated in
have
my
issues.
class, and literally
Okay.
every 30
Go ahead,
seconds
guys.
were trying to interrupt me. And that's, you obviously can't have that in the given classroom. So yeah, I'm hoping for the day too when there are more strategies to incorporate the classroom so that all people can succeed in it. And my closing message there is pay teachers more. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, fucking indeed, Brett. We need to pay
I
teachers
agree.
a shitload more in the United States.
Be able to teach kids in all kinds of different ways
Dude,
instead of just the standard way.
teachers
Yeah,
in the United States should be making six-figure salaries, in my personal
absolutely.
opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree. Jenny, did you say you have to go? Yep, she went. Okay, she had to go. Well, guys, Perry is charging his phone.
Fucking parents.
Nivek's probably working. Brett is still with us. Scott's still with us. Are you guys interested in going to the Discord, or are you just gonna go to bed after this?
Yeah, I'll pop over to the Discord for a bit. I'm probably
Yeah.
gonna go to bed in like about an hour or so.
Okay, I gotta cook a pizza I've got in there because I'm getting a little hungry. That's why
Oh
I'm kind
shit!
of going towards. Yeah, he said he'll be there in like 30. Yeah, I'll. Well, guys, it's been a to all my listeners, it's been a fantastic night. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my lectures. I love doing it because it teaches me just as much as it throws information out to you guys. I hope I make it easy to understand because I'm not amazing at making examples sometimes. But thanks for coming. Please subscribe to the Pangburn Hangout. Please come to see us on Discord, and we love you. Good night.